Let us move now from the crowded streets of the medieval city into the halls of power. Where once you imagined yourself as an ordinary townsman, we now turn our eyes toward the throne of England and the young king who once sat upon it. His name was Richard II. Richard was not born to rule in ordinary times. He came into the world in 1367 in the city of Bordeaux while it was still under English control. He was the grandson of the great King Edward III, whose reign had carried England into the long and difficult conflict we now call the 100 Years' War. From the very beginning, Richard's life was touched by grandeur and by fragility. His father was the celebrated Edward, known as the Black Prince, a warrior of unmatched reputation. But the Black Prince was gravely ill by the time Richard was still a child, and he died when the boy was only 10. Soon after, the old King Edward III also passed away. And so, in the year 1377, Richard, not yet an adolescent, ascended to the throne of England. Imagine the weight of a crown upon the head of a child, the halls around him filled with advisors, uncles, courtiers, each with their own ambitions and their own counsel. The kingdom itself was restless. Wars abroad strained its coffers, while discontent simmered at home. In these early years, Richard leaned heavily on the guidance of his counselors, but even as a boy, he displayed a strong sense of dignity and majesty. Chroniclers often remarked on his appearance, tall with fine features and a keen awareness of his own station. One of the defining moments of his young reign came only 4 years later, in 1381, during what has come to be known as the Peasants' Revolt. Discontent with high taxes and years of hardship had driven thousands of ordinary people into rebellion. They gathered in London, storming buildings, threatening the court, and demanding change. It was here that Richard, still only 14 years old, revealed a rare kind of composure. Standing before the furious crowd, he spoke to them directly. He spoke with calm assurance, promising reforms, pledging to hear their grievances. For a moment, it seemed that his words carried enough weight to soothe the unrest. Many believed that this was the moment when Richard truly became a king. But as years passed, the promise of that youthful courage gave way to a different reality. Richard's reign grew more troubled. He began to rule with a sense of absolute authority, insisting on the majesty of his crown and bristling at any opposition. His court became known for its refinement, its art, its pageantry, its attention to ritual, but also for its extravagance. Taxes were raised, favorites were promoted, and resentment deepened among the nobles. By the 1390s, Richard's rule was increasingly unstable. His cousin, Henry of Bolingbroke, the son of John of Gaunt, grew in influence. Henry was ambitious, careful, and determined. Tensions between the two men grew until Richard made a fateful decision. He exiled Henry, stripped him of his inheritance, and sought to strengthen his own grasp on the throne. But fortune can change quickly. When John of Gaunt died, Richard seized his estates for the crown. Henry returned in defiance, landing with an army. Support for Richard crumbled swiftly. Nobles who once bowed to him now sided with his rival. Richard, unprepared for such betrayal, found himself abandoned. In the year 1399, Richard II was deposed. He was taken into custody, forced to abdicate, and confined within Pontefract Castle. What precisely happened to him there remains a matter of quiet speculation. Most accounts agree that he died in captivity the following year, in 1400. Some suggest he starved, deliberately or by neglect. Others claim he was quietly killed. Whatever the truth, his reign ended not with triumph, but with silence, far from the majesty he once insisted upon. Imagine then the contrast. A boy who once calmed a furious mob with his words, ending his days alone in a cold stone keep. A king who demanded reverence for his crown, undone by the ambitions of his own cousin. Richard's story is not one of great victories on the battlefield, nor of lasting reforms. It is the story of a fragile throne, of a monarchy struggling to define itself in a turbulent age, and of a man whose youth promised brilliance, but whose later years revealed the limits of power when it is wielded without restraint. And so Richard II passed into history. A king remembered more for the drama of his downfall than for the strength of his rule. His life reminds us of the instability of medieval power and the fleeting nature of majesty in a time when loyalty could shift with the wind. As we leave his story behind, let the memory of Richard's crown rest quietly in the background, like a faded echo of ceremony. And let us move forward toward another mystery of the medieval age.
We leave behind the troubled reign of Richard II and turn now to a different kind of story. Not of one king, but of an entire brotherhood. A brotherhood that once stood at the very center of medieval power, and then, almost suddenly, seemed to vanish. The Knights Templar. The order began in the early 12th century. A group of knights, deeply devoted, swore themselves to protect pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. At first, they were few in number, humble, even poor. Their first quarters were in part of the old Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, from which they drew their name. But over time, the Templars grew. They fought in the Crusades, they trained relentlessly, and they became known for their discipline and bravery. And yet, it was not only on the battlefield that they found power. The order became wealthy. Pilgrims entrusted them with money for safekeeping, and in time, the Templars developed one of the first systems of banking in Europe. Imagine the great castles they built. Strongholds with thick walls, heavy gates, and towers that rose high above the landscape. These were not only military bases, but also centers of administration, where records were kept and wealth was guarded. By the 13th century, the Templars were powerful indeed. Too powerful, some thought. Their lands stretched across Europe and the Middle East. Kings borrowed from them. Merchants entrusted them with treasures. The order was exempt from many local laws, answering directly to the Pope himself. And then, as quickly as their rise, came their fall. In the year 1307, King Philip IV of France turned against them. He was deeply in debt to the Templars, and perhaps feared their influence. On a single day in October, his agents struck. Across France, Templars were arrested. Their leaders were accused of heresy, of secret rituals, of crimes whispered but never clearly proven. The charges were dark, but evidence was uncertain. Many today believe the accusations were a pretext, a way for Philip to erase his debts and seize their wealth. Over the next years, the order was dismantled. Trials were held. Some Templars confessed under pressure. Others resisted. By 1312, the Pope had officially disbanded the order. Its leaders, including the Grand Master Jacques de Molay, were executed. And here begins the mystery. What became of the Templars' immense treasure? Contemporaries believed they held vast stores of gold, relics, and documents. But when their castles were seized, little was found. Some said the wealth had been moved in secret. Others claimed that the Templars' treasure was less material and more spiritual, knowledge, relics, or even secrets too dangerous to reveal. Legends grew. Stories told of wagons rolling out of Paris by night, loaded with chests, bound for hidden locations. Some imagined treasure buried deep beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Others suggested it was spirited away to Scotland, to be guarded in secrecy. Still others linked the Templars to myths of the Holy Grail or the Ark of the Covenant. Of course, historians remain cautious. It is possible that much of the supposed treasure was exaggerated or spent long before the order fell. Yet the absence of clear records, combined with the dramatic end of the Templars, left a space for imagination. And into that space, centuries of mystery have flowed. Today, ruins of their fortresses still stand across Europe and the Middle East. Silent stones, weathered by centuries, holding whatever truths they once knew. Step into one and you may find a vaulted chamber, cool and dim. Carvings of crosses still etched into walls. Empty recesses where chests might once have been stored. A reminder that what was once so powerful can, in time, become a hushed echo. For those who like to dream, the treasure of the Templars may still be out there, resting quietly, hidden away. For others, the true treasure lies in their story, the rise of a brotherhood, the sudden fall, and the enduring mystery that refuses to fade. And as we leave behind the Templars, their cloaks of white and red, fading like a banner in the wind, we turn now to a different side of the medieval world. A world not of soldiers or kings, but of noblewomen, whose lives reveal another layer of the medieval city.
We have walked the narrow streets of the medieval city. We have listened to the story of a king undone by his own power. And we have wandered through the mystery of the Knights Templar. Now, let us step into a quieter, more refined world. A place of tapestries, carved wooden furniture, and long corridors of stone. The world of the medieval noble lady. Imagine yourself waking in a chamber within a great manor, or perhaps a castle. The walls are thick, designed to protect against storm and siege alike. The windows are small, their glass a luxury not always present. Instead, oiled cloth may cover the opening, letting in a softened, filtered light. Your bed is far grander than the straw mattress of the townsfolk. A heavy wooden frame with ropes stretched tight to hold a thick mattress stuffed with wool or feathers. Curtains hang from the canopy, both to give privacy and to keep out drafts. When you rise, the air is cool, even in summer, for castles are seldom warm. Servants attend you, helping to dress you in layers of linen, wool, and sometimes silk. Colors are carefully chosen, for dyes are costly, and rich hues display status. Jewelry might be fastened, a brooch, a chain, a ring set with a stone. The weight of these items is light compared to the weight of expectation. A noble lady is always observed, always measured by the grace with which she carries herself. Breakfast is modest. Bread, cheese, perhaps a cup of warm ale or watered wine. Meals are not hurried. Conversation might flow in gentle tones, while outside the day begins with the bustle of servants, horses, and messengers. The hours that follow are filled with duties. A noble lady does not toil in fields or shops, but her responsibilities are no less real. She oversees the running of the household, ordering supplies, directing servants, ensuring that food, clothing, and provisions are properly managed. She must know how to keep accounts, to manage estates in her husband's absence, and to maintain the reputation of the family. Leisure is also part of her day, though it is often purposeful. Embroidery is more than pastime. It is craft and expression. Delicate stitches bring forth patterns of flowers, animals, or sacred scenes. Reading may be possible, if she has been taught, though books are rare and precious, often in Latin or French. Music fills the chambers too. A lute, a harp, or the steady sound of voices in song. Beyond these walls lies the greater duty of marriage. For noblewomen, unions are rarely matters of personal choice. They are alliances, carefully arranged to bind families together, to secure land, wealth, or political influence. A young noblewoman may find herself wed to a man decades older, or sent to a distant estate far from the place she once called home. Motherhood is central. The bearing of children is expected and often frequent. Yet it is fraught with risk. The comforts of nobility cannot always shield against the dangers of childbirth or the illnesses that sweep through halls as they do through towns. A noble lady's life, though privileged, is never free from shadow. Evenings bring gatherings, a great hall filled with flickering torchlight, long tables spread with meats, stews, breads, and sweetmeats. Jesters or musicians provide gentle entertainment. The noble lady sits among her peers, her place determined by rank, her manners observed by all. Here she must balance grace with caution, speaking enough to be engaging, but never too freely to invite scandal. And when the hall grows quiet again, and the castle settles into the stillness of night, she returns to her chamber. The heavy door closes, the curtains are drawn around the bed, and within those stone walls, in the silence broken only by the wind, she rests. A day in the life of a medieval noble lady is one of contrasts, surrounded by luxuries unimaginable to most, yet constrained by duty and expectation. A life lived within walls both protective and confining. A rhythm steady, deliberate, and deeply bound to family, to faith, and to the fragile balance of power. And as we reflect on her world, we see another face of the medieval age. Not only hardship in the streets, not only mystery in the cloisters, not only kings upon their thrones, but the quieter endurance of women whose lives shaped households, families, and, in their own way, the course of history itself.
Perfect. Let's bring the journey to a close with a gentle, reflective conclusion that eases the listener into rest. And so, our walk through the medieval city draws to an end. We began among the crowded streets, where life was harsh and unrelenting. We followed a young king, Richard II, from his hopeful beginnings to his quiet downfall. We considered the mystery of the Knights Templar, whose treasure may never be fully known. And we stepped into the world of noblewomen, where duty, grace, and quiet strength defined each passing day. The medieval world was many things at once. It was noisy and crowded, yet also solemn and reverent. It was filled with hardship, but also with rituals, beauty, and a sense of shared faith.
For those who lived within its walls, the rhythm of daily life was steady, familiar, a cycle of work, prayer, and rest. As you listen now, perhaps in the quiet of your own room, you may notice the contrast. Where their nights were often cold, yours is warm. Where their food was scarce and plain, yours is plentiful and varied. Where their lives were bound to survival, you are free to drift, to imagine, to rest without fear. History, in this way, offers perspective. It reminds us of how far the world has changed and how deeply human lives have always been shaped by place, by time, and by circumstance. So, as you settle deeper into your pillow, allow these images of the past to fade softly into the background. The echo of footsteps on cobblestones, the toll of a distant church bell, the rustle of silk within a noble chamber. Let them become gentle, distant, like a lullaby of time itself. The medieval city never truly slept, but you may now let yourself drift. Rest, knowing that the past is far away and the present is here, calm and safe. Good night.
Welcome, and thank you for settling in. Today, we will embark on a slow, meandering journey along the banks of the Nile, tracing the rhythms of life in ancient Egypt. Imagine yourself waking to the soft, golden light of dawn spilling across a village of mud brick homes. The air is thick with the scent of the river, mingling with the warmth of the sun and the faint aroma of cooking grains. In this journey, we will explore what it was truly like to live in one of history's most enduring civilizations. We will look beyond the monumental pyramids, the awe-inspiring temples, and the hieroglyphs that still whisper across millennia. We will step gently into the everyday, the human, and the quietly fascinating aspects of life. The labor, the rituals, the simple pleasures, and the small struggles. Through 4 distinct segments, we will immerse ourselves in daily life, follow the paths of notable figures, unravel some lingering mysteries, and contrast the lives of commoners with those who walked among the elite. The rhythm will be steady, the narrative unhurried, and the focus softly illuminating the textures of the past. Allow yourself to drift along with the current of the Nile, letting history wash over you in a gentle, measured cadence.
Now imagine yourself walking slowly through the sunlit courtyards of Amarna, the city that rises from the sands as if it had always been part of the desert itself. The air carries the warmth of the sun-baked mud and the faint scent of oils and incense from nearby temples. Here you are not a farmer, but a witness to the quiet ambition and curiosity of a pharaoh who sought to reshape the spiritual world around him. Akhenaten, once known as Amenhotep IV, is a figure of both fascination and calm intensity. From the moment he ascended to the throne, he sought to guide Egypt along a new path. Rather than adhering to the long-established pantheon of gods, he chose to focus worship on Aten, the sun disk, the giver of light and life. His vision was unique, a gentle insistence that the divine could be singular yet omnipresent, like the sun itself. Imagine him moving through the palace corridors with Nefertiti by his side, her presence both elegant and commanding. She is not merely a consort, but a partner in this unfolding experiment of devotion. Together they oversee rituals that differ from tradition, prayers offered in open courtyards where the sunlight falls evenly upon all who gather. Every morning, the rhythm of devotion begins anew, soft chants rising, hands lifted in quiet reverence. The challenges of their reign are subtle but persistent. Traditional priests, bound by centuries of ritual, view this singular worship with suspicion. Nobles accustomed to influence through the old temples adjust reluctantly, their quiet frustrations lingering like shadows along the palace walls. Yet Akhenaten and Nefertiti persist, moving with a serene determination, crafting art and architecture that reflect their vision, elongated forms, intimate family depictions, and temples open to the sky, where light itself seems to caress the stone. Life at court carries both the ordinary and the extraordinary. Nefertiti, with her graceful gestures and calm authority, guides the education of their children, overseeing the scribes and artisans who translate vision into marble, pigment, and gold. Akhenaten, while distant from the daily grind of common life, moves among his people in careful observation, measuring the impact of his reforms, adjusting ceremonies, and ensuring the daily rhythms of the city flow smoothly. Yet even in this seat of power, uncertainty quietly lingers. The winds of history are unpredictable. Beyond the palace, the Nile continues its timeless course, indifferent to human ambition. The city of Amarna, carefully planned and meticulously maintained, rests on the fragile hope that this new vision will endure. You can almost sense the quiet tension, a gentle reminder that even the grandest plans are subject to time and circumstance. During moments of rest, you might imagine the pharaoh and queen walking along the terrace as the sun lowers in the sky, casting long shadows over sandstone walls. The glow of evening softens the stark lines of power, revealing the tender interactions between ruler and family, between the ambitious and the ordinary. These subtle details, the glance, the gesture, the soft-spoken words, form the gentle pulse of daily life at the very heart of Egypt's experiment in devotion. And as the night descends upon Amarna, you can picture lamps being lit in the palace chambers, the faint flicker of flame illuminating delicate frescoes. The rhythm of life continues, calm yet purposeful, steady yet filled with quiet complexity. This is the story of rulers who sought to reshape the spiritual landscape, whose ambitions intertwined with the textures of daily life, and whose legacy endures in the whispers of stone and paint.
Now, imagine yourself stepping quietly into the golden silence of a tomb, the air still and faintly cool, filled with the faint scent of aged wood and resin. You are not rushing, but moving slowly, your steps measured, as though each movement is part of a quiet meditation. This is the resting place of Tutankhamun, the boy king, whose life was brief, yet whose legacy has captured the curiosity of countless generations. Tutankhamun ascended the throne at a young age, following the radical reforms of Akhenaten. The world around him was one of transition, a delicate balance of old traditions and new visions. And yet, his reign was short, ending at just 18 or 19 years of age. Scholars have long debated what led to his untimely death, and the mystery is as gentle as it is compelling, a puzzle suspended in time. Some suggest an illness, a quiet vulnerability that was part of the rhythm of life in ancient Egypt. Others propose an accident, perhaps a fall from a chariot, a momentary slip that altered the course of history. There are even whispers of intrigue and familial tension, though these remain uncertain, like faint echoes in a vast desert. As you imagine these possibilities, notice how the mind drifts between certainty and speculation, the gentle pull of curiosity lulling you into contemplation.
The tomb itself is a world frozen in careful arrangement. Golden masks, delicate jewelry, painted chests, and ritual objects are laid out with precision, each artifact a quiet note in a larger symphony of remembrance. You can picture the artisans at work, their hands steady and meticulous, shaping each piece not in haste, but with deliberate care, honoring both the boy king and the traditions that preceded him. As you move slowly through this imagined space, consider the significance of these objects. Each tells a story of reverence, of belief in the afterlife, of the desire to preserve identity and memory. Even the smallest amulet, the tiniest painted figure, carries with it the weight of centuries, a soft whisper of care and devotion. This is history at its most intimate. Not the battles or the politics, but the quiet attention given to ensuring that life, though fleeting, was honored and remembered. The mystery of Tutankhamun's death reminds us that life, even for those in positions of prominence, is fragile. Yet within that fragility lies fascination, a gentle intrigue that invites reflection. Imagine the scholars and archaeologists of later generations uncovering these treasures, piecing together clues with patience and care, each fragment a soft echo from the past. The tomb is silent, yet it speaks in subtle ways, of family, of devotion, of the rhythms of life and death in a civilization that has long since faded from sight, but not from memory. And as you let your mind wander through these quiet halls, consider the broader perspective, a civilization that endured for millennia, shaped by rivers, sun, and sand, by rulers and farmers alike. Tutankhamun's life, though brief though it was, becomes a gentle lens through which to contemplate the cycles of history, the impermanence of life, and the soft, persistent pulse of human endeavor across time.
Now, imagine yourself slowly approaching the grand palace of a pharaoh, where the sunlight glimmers off limestone walls and the gentle rustle of palm trees sways in the warm breeze. Here, life takes on a different rhythm, one of measured luxury, careful ceremony, and subtle exertions of power. The sounds are softer, the spaces broader, the air carrying faint perfumes of lotus and myrrh. In the palace, servants move quietly through the corridors, carrying water in delicate jars or arranging offerings on stone altars. You can imagine the soft clatter of sandals on polished floors, the muted laughter of children playing in shaded courtyards, and the occasional low murmur of advisors speaking in hushed tones. The environment is carefully curated, designed to display the stability and grandeur of the pharaoh's rule. Yet it is not without its quiet demands. Meals are elaborate, yet soothing. Imagine trays of bread, fruits, and dates arranged with precision, fish grilled over gentle embers, and honey-sweetened pastries that glimmer under the sun. The preparation itself is a rhythmic process, repeated daily, echoing the care and consistency that define palace life. Every object has a place, every action a subtle purpose, creating a world that is calm, ordered, and deliberate. Beyond the tangible comforts, there is the structured flow of duties and rituals. Pharaohs would rise with the sun, receive homage from officials, and perform rituals designed to honor the gods and maintain cosmic order. Yet, despite the apparent formality, the pace is steady, measured, almost meditative. The rituals themselves are gentle repetitions, chants and gestures performed with calm precision, a quiet reflection of the harmony that the pharaoh seeks to project across the land. In the private chambers, the pharaoh and family might enjoy quiet moments of reflection or leisure. Nefertiti or other consorts might engage in gentle conversation, while music,
soft and soothing, fills the rooms with a sense of serenity. The walls are adorned with painted scenes of daily life, divine interactions and celebrations, each image a reminder of continuity, tradition, and the gentle flow of time.
Hey guys, tonight we're going to travel back, way back, to ancient Mesopotamia, where the first scribes began their long, ink-free, clay-covered careers. Picture it? The air is warm, the riverbanks smell of damp reeds, and every surface seems to be coated in a thin layer of dust that no broom has ever conquered. You're standing in the middle of a bustling settlement, a few thousand years before Netflix, before pizza delivery, before even the idea of socks as we know them. You're here to learn what it felt like to live the life of a Babylonian scribe. Spoiler: it's a lot less glamorous than it sounds, and you probably wouldn't survive the first week, unless you really enjoy clay dust permanently embedded in your fingernails. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling generous, drop your location and local time down in the comments. I love knowing where everyone is listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start by squinting against the early morning sun, which is already bouncing off the mud brick walls around you. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers are never far, which means the air carries that earthy, watery smell of silt. Somewhere in the distance, a goat is bleating in a voice that sounds suspiciously like your uncle calling you for dinner. You brush it off and step into the dusty streets of Babylon. Or, depending on the century, perhaps Ur or Uruk. Cities here have a knack for springing up and collapsing like sandcastles at high tide. The first thing you notice about scribes is their status. They aren't kings, priests, or warriors, but they hold a quiet power. When the king wants a law recorded, it's the scribe who presses it into clay. When a merchant lends a sack of barley to a neighbor, it's the scribe who notes it down, ensuring nobody forgets later. Historians still argue whether scribes were respected more for their brains or resented for their nitpicky attention to detail. Imagine being the ancient equivalent of that one co-worker who insists on correcting everyone's grammar in emails. The main tool of your trade is not a pen, not ink, but clay. Endless clay. You dig it up, knead it until it's pliable, and flatten it into small, palm-sized tablets. Each one is a little sticky rectangle of potential knowledge, or potential boredom, depending on whether you're writing about epic poetry or sheep rations. Fun fact, some of these tablets are still perfectly readable today. Meanwhile, your modern grocery list from last week has already been lost to the void. Once you've prepared your tablet, you pick up your stylus, a trimmed reed, sharpened into a wedge. You press it into the clay at careful angles, creating lines and triangles. This wedge-shaped writing, cuneiform, is basically the original font. It's not cursive or block letters. It's more like trying to play Tetris with a stick. And yes, you'd better get it right the first time, because erasing means smudging clay with your finger until the whole thing looks like a failed pottery project. The role of the scribe stretches across everything: tax records, religious hymns, kingly decrees, shopping lists, and even the occasional love poem. Your job description is both accountant and novelist, with a dash of bureaucrat. It's like being forced to write receipts all day, only sometimes your receipts turn into literature. And unlike modern office jobs, You don't get a coffee machine, just water jars that may or may not have yesterday's mosquito still floating inside. The great irony, while kings and priests strutted around visibly in ceremonies, it was the scribes who kept their legacies alive. Without someone scratching their names into clay, those rulers would be as forgotten as last week's dream. Yet for all that importance, scribes didn't exactly live like royalty. You weren't driving the latest chariot or feasting on roasted gazelle every night. You probably had a modest mud brick home, a diet heavy on bread, onions, and beer. Yes, beer. It was safer than water, and you might need a mug or two after spending 10 hours counting goats that never stayed still long enough to tally. Here's the quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have found school tablets showing practice exercises. Some are covered with neat, careful symbols, but others, not so much. Imagine a 4,000-year-old notebook where a student clearly gave up halfway, carving lazy, crooked wedges like, "Yeah, whatever, I'll just wing it." At least kids haven't changed much. Historians still argue whether these sloppy tablets were tolerated as beginner mistakes or if the teacher marched the student outside for a good scolding and maybe a chore involving an extra heavy water jug. Hey guys, tonight we're going to travel back, way back, to ancient Mesopotamia, where the first scribes began their long, ink-free, clay-covered careers. Picture it. The air is warm, the riverbanks smell of damp reeds, and every surface seems to be coated in a thin layer of dust that no broom has ever conquered. You're standing in the middle of a bustling settlement, a few thousand years before Netflix, before pizza delivery, before even the idea of socks as we know them. You're here to learn what it felt like to live the life of a Babylonian scribe. Spoiler: it's a lot less glamorous than it sounds, and you probably wouldn't survive the first week, unless you really enjoy clay dust permanently embedded in your fingernails. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling generous, drop your location and local time down in the comments. I love knowing where everyone is listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start by squinting against the early morning sun, which is already bouncing off the mud brick walls around you. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers are never far, which means the air carries that earthy, watery smell of silt. Somewhere in the distance, a goat is bleating in a voice that sounds suspiciously like your uncle calling you for dinner. You brush it off and step into the dusty streets of Babylon. Or, depending on the century, perhaps Ur or Uruk. Cities here have a knack for springing up and collapsing like sandcastles at high tide. The first thing you notice about scribes is their status. They aren't kings, priests, or warriors, but they hold a quiet power. When the king wants a law recorded, it's the scribe who presses it into clay. When a merchant lends a sack of barley to a neighbor, it's the scribe who notes it down, ensuring nobody forgets later. Historians still argue whether scribes were respected more for their brains or resented for their nitpicky attention to detail. Imagine being the ancient equivalent of that one co-worker who insists on correcting everyone's grammar in emails. The main tool of your trade is not a pen, not ink, but clay. Endless clay. You dig it up, knead it until it's pliable, and flatten it into small, palm-sized tablets. Each one is a little sticky rectangle of potential knowledge, or potential boredom, depending on whether you're writing about epic poetry or sheep rations. Fun fact, some of these tablets are still perfectly readable today. Meanwhile, your modern grocery list from last week has already been lost to the void. Once you've prepared your tablet, you pick up your stylus, a trimmed reed, sharpened into a wedge. You press it into the clay at careful angles, creating lines and triangles. This wedge-shaped writing, cuneiform, is basically the original font. It's not cursive or block letters. It's more like trying to play Tetris with a stick. And yes, you'd better get it right the first time, because erasing means smudging clay with your finger until the whole thing looks like a failed pottery project. The role of the scribe stretches across everything: tax records, religious hymns, kingly decrees, shopping lists, and even the occasional love poem. Your job description is both accountant and novelist, with a dash of bureaucrat. It's like being forced to write receipts all day, only sometimes your receipts turn into literature. And unlike modern office jobs, you don't get a coffee machine, just water jars that may or may not have yesterday's mosquito still floating inside. The great irony: while kings and priests strutted around visibly in ceremonies, it was the scribes who kept their legacies alive. Without someone scratching their names into clay, those rulers would be as forgotten as last week's dream. Yet for all that importance, scribes didn't exactly live like royalty. You weren't driving the latest chariot or feasting on roasted gazelle every night. You probably had a modest mud brick home, a diet heavy on bread, onions, and beer. Yes, beer. It was safer than water, and you might need a mug or two after spending 10 hours counting goats that never stayed still long enough to tally. Here's the quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have found school tablets showing practice exercises. Some are covered with neat, careful symbols, but others, not so much. Imagine a 4,000-year-old notebook where a student clearly gave up halfway, carving lazy, crooked wedges like, "Yeah, whatever, I'll just wing it." At least kids haven't changed much. Historians still argue whether these sloppy tablets were tolerated as beginner mistakes, or if the teacher marched the student outside for a good scolding and maybe a chore involving an extra heavy water jug. You walk through a courtyard where other scribes sit hunched over, scratching away. The sound is faint but constant, the soft tap-tap of stylus into clay. It's oddly soothing, like rain hitting a window, except instead of raindrops, it's thousands of tiny triangles embedding themselves into human history. Every now and then, someone sighs deeply, stretches their back, and mutters something under their breath that you're glad you don't understand. Scribe humor is probably as bad as modern accounting jokes. As the sun climbs, you notice the way light glints off drying tablets laid out on racks. They'll be stored in temple archives, palace storerooms, or shoved under floorboards, waiting for some modern archaeologist to rediscover them millennia later. You picture one of your shopping lists: 2 onions, 3 loaves, 1 jar of beer, being displayed in a glass case at a museum, and you can't help but laugh. Imagine a tourist paying $10 to see your reminder to buy onions. By now, you're starting to understand the peculiar balance of power scribes held. You aren't glamorous, but you are indispensable. Without you, kings can't boast, priests can't collect offerings, and merchants can't cheat each other. You are the human hard drive of your society. And though clay dust coats your hands and your back aches from endless hunching, you also carry a quiet satisfaction. You're literally writing the first pages of history. Of course, whether you'd actually survive this job is another question. Between the endless clay dust, the lack of ergonomic chairs, and the daily risk of sunburn, you'd probably call it quits by lunchtime. But don't worry, you're here only for the story, and there's plenty more of it waiting as your day unfolds in Mesopotamia. You're barely settled into your role as a new Babylonian scribe, before reality sets in. This wasn't a career you just wandered into by accident. Becoming a scribe required years of schooling. And if you thought modern students had it rough, wait until you find yourself in the tablet house, the Adaba, where apprentices learned to carve the written word. You wake at dawn, dragging your tired feet across packed earth, clutching a lump of clay the way a modern student might carry a backpack stuffed with overdue assignments. Inside the Adaba, the air is dry, the walls smell of baked mud, and the teacher, stern as a stone statue, waits with a reed stylus in hand. Not for writing, mind you, but for pointing, correcting, and occasionally smacking the desk for dramatic effect. You sit cross-legged with a dozen other children, each trying not to look too terrified. The first lessons: memorize symbols. Not letters, not even words, but hundreds upon hundreds of wedge-shaped marks, each with its own meaning. Some represent sounds, some whole words, others abstract ideas. It's like learning hieroglyphics, except instead of birds and eyes, you're stuck with combinations of triangles. Your clay tablet, moist and soft, sits in your lap. You press the stylus, trying to make the correct wedge shape, only to realize you've jabbed the clay too deeply. The teacher leans over, frowns, and mutters something under his breath. Congratulations, you've just failed your first assignment. To fix it, you smear the clay flat again, leaving behind a sloppy mess that looks like oatmeal. Modern erasers suddenly feel like a miracle. Apprenticeship wasn't just about copying neat rows of symbols. It was about repetition, endless repetition. You practice writing the word for barley 20 times, then goat, then temple tax. Your wrist aches, your back complains, and your fingers feel like they've been chewing on reeds instead of carving with them. Historians still argue whether apprentices were mostly children of wealthy families, or if talented kids from humbler backgrounds could claw their way in. Either way, one thing's clear: this was no casual hobby. You either committed to years of clay-carving drudgery, or you gave up and went back to farming onions in the hot sun. Every now and then, you glance at the other kids. Some are neat freaks, producing elegant little wedges that look almost professional. Others are clearly struggling. One boy nearby has turned his tablet into a chaotic scattering of triangles, like a hedgehog rolled through it. And then there's the prankster who tries to sculpt a doodle of a donkey instead of writing grain. The teacher notices, of course, and suddenly the prankster is tasked with fetching water jars all afternoon. The moral: don't doodle donkeys on your clay homework. And yes, punishments were a real part of this training. Some surviving tablets even contain student complaints, scrawled in frustrated wedges. The teacher hit me, or he punished me with a stick. You can practically hear the ancient equivalent of, "Ugh, I hate this class." At least modern kids can vent on social media. Here, your complaints become archaeological evidence for future generations. Still, there's a rhythm to the day. Morning drills in symbols, short breaks with bread and dates, then back to copying longer texts. Sometimes you're tasked with memorizing proverbs. One tablet lists wisdom like, "A scribe who knows nothing, what is he?" Or, "He who does not listen, his learning will vanish." It's the ancient equivalent of motivational posters, except instead of a sunset and an eagle, you've got clay and wedges. Here's your quirky tidbit for the day. Some teachers apparently made students practice while singing their lines. Imagine chanting "barley, barley, barley" in a sing-song voice, while your classmates echo back like a slightly depressed choir. Whether this actually helped memory or just annoyed everyone is up for debate. Historians still argue whether these chants were central to education or just a quirky habit of one over-enthusiastic teacher. By late afternoon, your fingers are cramped. Your clay tablets are scattered around you like a mini-brick factory, and your brain is swimming with symbols. You sneak a glance at the doorway, where sunlight slants in golden and tempting. Freedom is out there, kids running, goats wandering, a merchant shouting about fresh figs, but nope, you're stuck indoors, scratching triangles into clay, because that's the price of becoming a scribe. The apprenticeship could last years, sometimes a decade or more. You'd advance from simple lists to complex contracts, then finally to literature, epic tales, hymns, myths. Only once you'd proven yourself precise enough to record temple accounts without losing a cow or two would you graduate to the real deal. Until then, you're just another kid covered in clay dust, dreaming of escape. But here's the funny thing. Despite the punishments, the drudgery, the aching knees, many apprentices grew genuinely proud of their skill. To be a scribe was to rise above the fields and the plow. You'd earn status, steady work, and the ability to preserve your civilization's memory. And somewhere in that tired, inkless classroom, you feel a little spark of ambition. If you can just survive a few more years of chanting barley and dodging the teacher's stylus, you'll make it. For now, though, you rub your sore hands, press one last triangle into the clay, and remind yourself, this is just the beginning.
The clay dust clings to your hair and nostrils as you stumble out of the tablet house, still half hearing the echo of your classmates chanting barley in the back of your mind. At last, you get a glimpse of the wider world, the place where your skills will actually matter. The city of Uruk wakes up with you, buzzing with a rhythm that feels both chaotic and oddly familiar, like a farmer's market crossed with rush hour traffic. The morning begins before the sun even clears the horizon. You rise on a reed mat in your family's modest mud brick home. Your mother is already grinding grain with a heavy stone, the steady scrape echoing through the walls. The smell of baking bread drifts in, mingling with the tang of onions sizzling in a small clay pan. Breakfast isn't glamorous, mostly flatbread and watered beer, but it's hearty enough to fuel you through the day. You stretch, rub your stiff shoulders, and mentally prepare for another round of endless lists, tablets, and numbers. Stepping into the street, you're immediately hit by a wall of sound. Donkeys bray in protest as merchants load them with sacks of barley. Potters bang clay jars together, advertising their sturdiness by clanging them like drums. A baker shouts about fresh loaves, and a brewer tempts passers-by with frothy jars of beer. The air smells like a blend of yeast, manure, and smoke, an aroma that might make a modern visitor wrinkle their nose but to you just says, home. Your job as a junior scribe starts early. Today, you're stationed at the temple granary, where carts full of grain roll in from the countryside. Farmers arrive sweaty and dusty, leading donkeys with bulging saddlebags. Each delivery needs to be weighed, counted, and recorded because heaven forbid anyone accidentally forgets how much grain they owe. You settle on a stool, spread a damp tablet across your lap, and begin the tedious but vital process of pressing wedges. The system is precise. Marks for numbers, marks for barley, marks for goats, marks for silver. It's like inventing spreadsheets, except you don't get autofill to copy the formulas down. You press wedge after wedge, listening to farmers argue with the overseer about whether that last basket was full or just a little light. One man insists the donkeys must have eaten some on the way, which sounds suspiciously convenient. You record the official number anyway, scribes aren't here to play detective, just to make the record. Historians still argue whether scribes were completely impartial clerks or if they sometimes played favorites. Maybe you'd write down a generous total if the farmer slipped you a fig or two. Maybe not. Either way, the weight of responsibility rests in your clay-covered hands, and you can't help wondering whether one sloppy wedge could someday lead to a palace audit. By mid-morning, the sun is fierce. Sweat trickles down your back, clay tablets dry too fast in the heat, and your stylus keeps sticking. To keep focus, you chew absently on the end of your reed, the way a modern student gnaws a pencil. The taste is bitter, grassy,
and not at all satisfying, but it beats nodding off in front of the overseer. You wonder if every scribe has teeth marks on their stylus or if it's just your nervous habit. As you work, the temple bell clangs, a heavy bronze ring that carries across the city. Priests in long robes sweep past with solemn faces, carrying baskets of bread and jars of beer as offerings to the gods. You pause for a moment, stylus hovering over clay, watching the procession. The sight is impressive, even moving, but you can't help thinking, someone has to record all that bread and beer, too. And guess who that someone usually is? Yep, scribes again. Here's your quirky tidbit for the morning. Sometimes, when scribes recorded temple rations, they slipped in doodles of animals or exaggerated numbers, almost like inside jokes. Archaeologists have found tablets with unusually fat sheep drawings, leading to speculation that some bored scribe decided to have a little fun. Historians still argue whether these were teaching exercises, acts of humor, or just mistakes. Personally, you like to imagine a grumpy scribe chuckling to himself as he secretly gave a donkey the world's biggest ears. The market outside the temple walls adds its own rhythm to your day. You hear women haggling over spices, shepherds calling out their flocks, and children chasing each other through the crowd. A man selling date syrup nearly collides with a potter balancing a stack of jars, and you can't help but smile at the chaos. It's noisy, messy, alive, and every bit of it somehow ends up in the hands of scribes. By midday, your stomach growls. You trade a quick mark on someone's tally for a crust of bread and a sip of beer. The bread is chewy, the beer thick and almost porridge-like. It fills you up, even if it doesn't exactly taste like fine dining. You wipe your mouth on your sleeve, stretch your legs, and then get back to it, more donkeys, more grain, more clay. The afternoon drags, shadows lengthen, and your stylus hand cramps. You pause to flex your fingers, glance around, and imagine for just a moment what life might be like if you weren't a scribe. Maybe you'd be a farmer, your back bent under the sun. Maybe a potter, your hands shaping jars instead of symbols. But then you remember, those jobs don't carry the same quiet prestige. They don't give you the chance to carve your mark into history, literally. And so, as the sun sets in a blaze of orange and red, you finish your last tablet of the day. You stack it carefully with the others, brush clay dust from your lap, and feel a tired but undeniable pride. You may not be a king or a warrior, but without you, none of them would have a legacy.
Your morning in Uruk might have ended with aching hands and a pile of dusty clay, but the day isn't over yet. As the city slips into its afternoon rhythm, you return to what makes or breaks every scribe, the tools of the trade. Without them, you're just a person staring at lumps of mud. With them, you're a magician turning dirt into memory. First, the stylus. You pick up a fresh reed from the bundle near your workbench. Reeds grow thick along the riverbanks, buzzing with dragonflies and croaking frogs. You slice the reed at an angle with a small knife until the tip is sharp and wedge-shaped. This is your pen, though it feels more like a tiny chisel. The cut has to be just right. Too blunt and your symbols blur. Too sharp and you risk gouging the clay. You test it against your thumb. Perfect. Every scribe swears by his stylus, and you're no exception. Some prefer a wider wedge, others a narrow one. A few obsessive types keep 3 or 4 on hand for different strokes, like artists swapping brushes. You, however, chew on yours like it's a stick of sugar cane, which horrifies your teacher but calms your nerves. The result? Your stylus tip sometimes has tiny teeth marks, an archaeological clue for future generations about your questionable habits. Then comes the clay itself. You scoop it from the riverbank, heavy and cool in your hands. Mixed with just enough water, it becomes pliable, ready to receive the stylus. Too wet and your wedge marks smear. Too dry and the surface cracks before you finish your sentence. You knead the clay, fold it, press it flat, then slap it into a neat tablet shape. It's messy work, and your fingernails are permanently rimmed with gray. Somewhere in the future, people will pay money for spa mud treatments, but for you, it's just another Tuesday. The smell of wet clay lingers everywhere, earthy, slightly sour, like a damp cellar. You smooth the surface, feeling its cool weight in your palms, and there's a strange comfort in the ritual. Historians still argue whether scribes prepared their own tablets every time or if apprentices did most of the grunt work. Either way, you find yourself muttering, would it kill someone to invent paper already? You don't just write on clay tablets, though. Sometimes wax-coated boards or even stone are used for important inscriptions. But clay dominates daily life because it's cheap, abundant, and accidentally durable. Once dried or baked, these tablets outlast almost anything. Fire destroys buildings, floods wash away walls, but those little clay blocks endure. You laugh to yourself. Your to-do list might be around longer than the king's palace. As you settle into your seat, you think about the archives. Whole rooms stacked with tablets, shelves groaning under the weight of recorded grain counts, contracts, and hymns. Walking through one feels like wandering into a mud brick library where every book is heavy, square, and written in triangles. It's impressive, yes, but also a nightmare if you ever misfile a tablet. Imagine needing one specific receipt from 3 years ago and having to sift through piles of clay blocks. You suspect some poor apprentice is still looking. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some scribes carved practice tablets shaped like little lentils, no bigger than your palm. Archaeologists find them scattered like ancient stress balls. You imagine a student fiddling with one in class, tossing it in the air, then hastily scribbling on it when the teacher walks past. Historians still argue whether these mini tablets were genuine exercises or just toys. Either way, they'd fit neatly in your pocket if Mesopotamian tunics had pockets, which sadly they don't. The tools also shape your body. After years of pressing reeds into clay, your fingers develop calluses, your knuckles ache, and your posture becomes a permanent hunch. You rub your shoulders, trying to straighten your spine, but the relief never lasts. There's a joke among scribes. We write the laws that straighten others, but none that straighten us. It gets a polite chuckle every time, mostly because everyone is too tired to laugh properly. The sun dips lower, shadows linger across the workshop, and you're still at it, preparing tablets, sharpening reeds, carefully stacking your day's work. The steady rhythm of press, lift, becomes almost meditative. You slip into a trance, half aware of your surroundings, the drone of insects outside, the creak of a door, the faint laughter of children playing in the street. In that quiet repetition, you almost forget your aching back. Almost. Sometimes you wonder if anyone will ever read these tablets again. Will your neat wedge marks sit forgotten in a temple cellar? Or will someone centuries later find them, brush away the dust, and marvel at your perfect barley symbol? The thought both comforts and unnerves you. It's like whispering into the future with no idea who will listen. At last you read phrase, splitting into useless strands. You toss it aside with a sigh, grab another from the bundle, and sharpen it once more. Clay dust settles into the folds of your tunic, your fingers ache, and you can't help thinking, tomorrow you'll be right back here, doing it all again. Yet for all the monotony, there's a quiet satisfaction in mastering these tools, in bending earth and reed into the language of your world. The clay dust might be settling on your tunic, but the work of a scribe is only warming up. After all, you aren't carving triangles for the sheer joy of making your hands ache. Your job is the invisible engine that keeps the entire Babylonian economy ticking along. Without you, the flow of barley, silver, goats, and beer would dissolve into a chaos of who owes what. Imagine thousands of farmers shouting, "I paid already," at once, and you'll see why scribes are indispensable. Your morning starts at the counting house, a long hall beside the temple where the air smells of grain, sweat, and damp clay. Merchants shuffle in carrying jars, baskets, and contracts. Some bring cattle, their hooves clopping on the stone floor. Others drag sacks of barley so heavy the seams split, leaving trails of golden grain across the floor like breadcrumbs to a very boring fairy tale. You sit cross-legged with a tablet on your lap, stylus ready. A merchant approaches, huffing from the weight of his goods, and you begin your dance of numbers. One mark for 10 goats, another for a jar of silver, another for barley. It's like juggling, except your balls are tiny wedges that could ruin a contract if angled wrong. Here's the mainstream fact. Mesopotamia basically invented accounting. Every contract, loan, and tax collection was meticulously tracked in cuneiform. That's right, before people wrote epic poetry or love letters, they wrote receipts. Humanity's first words weren't "I love you," but "You owe me 3 jars of beer." You scrawl carefully, the clay squishing slightly under your stylus when a debate breaks out nearby. A farmer insists his goats are healthier than average and should count for more. The overseer rolls his eyes, mutters something about "a goat is a goat," and you suppress a chuckle. You just write down the number. Nobody asked for your opinion. Still, it amuses you that the ancient equivalent of "my car is worth more than the trade-in value" existed millennia ago. Not every record is dull, though. Some tablets list elaborate trade routes, merchants shipping lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, cedarwood from Lebanon, or copper from Oman. You feel a thrill at the idea that your wedges connect distant lands, like the world's first global spreadsheet. Historians still argue whether scribes truly understood the vast networks they recorded, or if they were just writing down numbers without grasping the bigger picture. But sitting there, pressing neat triangles into clay, you like to think you're part of something larger than yourself. Then there are the loans. Oh, the loans. A farmer borrows seed grain in spring, promising to repay after the harvest. You note the terms: interest at 1/3, due after so many months. If the harvest fails, well, let's just say the debtor might spend more time hoeing the temple fields than his own. You wonder how many lives hinged on the neatness of your wedges. One crooked symbol and someone could owe 3 goats instead of 2. No pressure. Quirky tidbit. Some tablets survive with what look like doodles of tally marks scratched into the margins, possibly by scribes double-checking their math. Imagine the first accountant scribbling, "Does this add up?" next to a loan contract. You grin at the thought. Ancient auditors existed, and they probably weren't much fun at parties either. The day stretches into afternoon, and the hall grows stifling. Dust swirls in the air, coating your tongue with grit. You wipe your forehead, glance at your tablet, and wonder if you'll ever stop dreaming in wedges. The repetition is endless, yet necessary. The economy doesn't care if your hand cramps. Somewhere outside, children laugh and splash in a canal, free from clay tablets. You sigh and press on. Occasionally, the overseer checks your work. He scans your tablet with narrowed eyes, nods once, and grunts approval. No words of praise, no good job, just a grunt. You take it as a win. After all, in a world where a single smudged wedge could mean a lawsuit, silence is the highest compliment. As the sun dips lower, the last merchants shuffle out, their contracts safely immortalized in clay. You stack your tablets, each one drying into permanence, and stretch your aching legs. The economy will keep moving tomorrow because of you. No fanfare, no applause, just the quiet pride of knowing every goat, jar, and sack is accounted for. And as you trudge home, clay dust sticking to your skin, you can't help but laugh at the absurdity. Thousands of years from now, someone in a museum will peer at your neat wedges under glass and whisper, "Look, the first accountant." The workday might be over, but your duties as a scribe don't stop at balancing goats and tallying grain. Every so often, the overseer drops a different kind of assignment in your lap, one that feels almost indulgent compared to columns of numbers. Today, you're tasked with copying a story. And not just any story, but one of those grand, sweeping epics that makes your cramped reed stylus hand feel like it's part of something bigger than ledgers and loans. You sit cross-legged on the floor of the tablet house, fresh clay balanced on your knees. The stylus hovers, and you press the first wedge. Gilgamesh. The name itself feels heavier than barley counts or temple taxes. You've heard the tale recited by priests before, sung in slow, rhythmic chants by storytellers in the square. Now, it's your job to trap those words in clay, one careful triangle at a time. The story unfolds as your stylus dances. Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, mighty but flawed. He battles Enkidu, wrestles with gods, searches for immortality. As you carve, you wonder if kings secretly squirm reading these stories. After all, not every king comes out looking wise. Historians still argue whether scribes wrote these epics as state propaganda or as subtle critiques of their rulers. You press your wedges with a tiny smirk, imagining Gilgamesh himself sitting in the audience, arms crossed, muttering, "That's not how it happened." Here's a quirky fact. Archaeologists have found practice tablets where apprentice scribes copied lines from epics but got distracted halfway through, leaving half-finished sentences or random symbols that look suspiciously like doodles. Maybe one apprentice got bored during the flood story and thought, "Nope, I'm done with this rain business." You sympathize. Writing about gods smiting humanity can be less thrilling after 4 hours of clay pressing. Yet, there's something hypnotic about the rhythm. Line after line, you feel yourself pulled into the tale, as though the wedges themselves are whispering. Your stylus taps against clay in steady beats, like a drum accompanying the narrative. Outside, donkeys bray, children laugh, merchants argue. But inside the tablet house, you're in the cedar forests with Gilgamesh, battling the great Humbaba. The best part? Every so often, the story sneaks in a detail so mundane it makes you laugh. Lists of gifts to gods, descriptions of banquets, or how many jars of beer were consumed after a battle. You pause, chuckling softly, because even in legends, it always comes back to food and drink. Maybe humanity hasn't changed that much after all. Of course, the clay has its own limits. Unlike parchment or paper, it doesn't allow for sprawling prose. You press a few lines, smooth the surface, and realize you need another tablet. The Epic of Gilgamesh stretches across a small mountain of clay, each tablet heavy enough to knock someone unconscious if dropped. You imagine a poor apprentice carrying a stack of them and tripping in the street, epic tumbling everywhere. The gods might not appreciate that. The pride in copying these stories is real. While numbers keep the city running, it's the stories that give it soul. You think of future generations, scribes like you, apprentices yet unborn, reading your careful wedges and feeling connected to the same characters. It's a strange kind of immortality, one Gilgamesh himself would have envied. The tablet dries slowly, the wedges crisp against the clay surface. You blow a little dust away, satisfied with the neatness of your work. Tomorrow, you might be back to counting goats, but tonight, you've walked beside kings and gods. You've turned soft mud into legend. And as the last light of day filters into the tablet house, you realize something quietly profound. Numbers may hold the world together, but it's stories that keep people awake. Or, in your case, gently send them to sleep.
After the intensity of palace and temple work, it's a relief to spend a day in the marketplace, observing the ebb and flow of ordinary life. You stroll through narrow streets where vendors call out their wares: baskets of figs, jars of date syrup, coils of wool, and shiny clay pots stacked precariously like miniature towers. The smell of fresh bread mixes with the tang of fish from the river, and the occasional clatter of a donkey cart makes you flinch, wishing the roads were quieter. As a scribe, your role here is subtle but crucial. You aren't just observing, you're counting, recording, and ensuring the city's economy hums. You jot down the number of goats sold, barrels of beer traded, and bundles of grain moved from one stall to another. Your wedge marks flow smoothly into clay tablets, almost like musical notation. Historians still argue whether scribes in marketplaces acted purely as recorders or sometimes influenced trades with small adjustments, favoring friends or family. You secretly hope your numbers are impartial, but you can't resist adding a tiny flourish, a wedge shaped like a little goat, just for fun.
The sights and sounds are a sensory feast. Children run barefoot between stalls, chasing stray chickens, their laughter mingling with the calls of hawkers advertising herbs, spices, and the occasional exotic fruit. You smell roasted onions sizzling over small fires and the sweet, sticky aroma of date cakes. Occasionally, a vendor waves a coin at you, trying to distract you from your tally. You shake your head, stylus in hand, amused. You may be in the middle of trade, but the temptation of bribes seems universal, even in 2000 BCE. Quirky tidbit: some tablets show scribes doodling caricatures of unruly customers, small goat-like figures with exaggerated ears, or men with absurdly large hats. You imagine your ancient counterpart snickering under his breath, thinking, someday they'll dig this up and wonder what it means. Historians still argue whether these sketches were mere boredom or subtle social commentary. You like to believe they were a bit of humor to keep the day light. You navigate past merchants bartering for cloth, sometimes stopping to note weights and measures. Scales clink and the occasional fruit topples from a basket, rolling underfoot. The rhythm of this space is different from the palace or temple. It's messy, vibrant, unpredictable. And yet, even here, scribes maintain the invisible thread of order, connecting buyers, sellers, and officials through precise records. Occasionally, you pause to watch artisans at work, potters spinning their wheels, blacksmiths hammering molten metal, and weavers threading intricate patterns. You imagine the clay of your tablets capturing their labor, silently acknowledging their craft alongside yours. You scribble a few lines for the unusual transactions, a rare copper ingot changing hands, a basket of imported figs, and think about the long chain of human effort that leads to this bustling market scene. By afternoon, the sun has warmed the narrow streets, and the smell of roasted grain and sweat fills the air. Merchants shout, children shriek, and donkeys bray as if in chorus. You carefully finish your tallies, stack the tablets, and glance at the crowd. Each wedge is a record of life, small but significant, a way to hold the chaos at bay. As you leave the marketplace, tablets clutched to your chest, you notice the shadows stretching long and thin across the streets. You can hear a distant lute playing, and someone is singing a melody about gods and kings. For a moment, you imagine yourself in a different city, a different century, performing the same work, preserving the rhythm of life in wedge-shaped script. You shake your head, smiling at the timelessness of it all, and trudge home, clay dust stubbornly sticking to your tunic. After the bustle of the marketplace, you shift focus to an aspect of daily life that is both practical and peculiar: medicine and remedies. You sit at a low wooden bench in the corner of the temple, where small jars and clay tablets line the shelves like a chaotic library of cures. The smell of herbs, dried roots, and animal fat hangs in the air, sharp and earthy. Today, your task is to copy medical lists, recording treatments, dosages, and the occasional charm intended to ward off illness. Your stylus hovers over the clay as you begin with the mainstream facts. The Babylonians had surprisingly advanced knowledge for the era. They used bandages, poultices, and even attempted surgeries like setting broken bones. Instructions are meticulous. Grind a particular herb, mix it with honey, apply at dawn, repeat 3 times. You press wedges carefully, aware that a misplaced symbol could confuse an important treatment. Historians still argue whether these remedies were actually effective or if they functioned more as ritual prescriptions to reassure patients. Quirky tidbit: some of the tablets list remedies that feel downright strange to you. A concoction for headaches calls for a mixture of onions, crocodile dung, and a whisper of incantation. You grimace slightly, imagining the smell, and then shake your head with a smile, thinking, well, at least they were inventive. Despite the oddity, these prescriptions reveal a society deeply concerned with health and well-being, blending observation with superstition in ways that seem almost charmingly human. You notice a small group of apprentices nearby, practicing the spelling of ingredients while mimicking the gestures of a healer. One of them accidentally flings powdered herb onto a tablet, smudging a perfect row of wedges.
The teacher sighs, sighing echoed by all the scribes present, and the young apprentice mutters an apology under his breath. You chuckle softly, recalling your own mistakes from years past. As the day continues, you copy lists of symptoms and remedies: fever, toothache, rashes, stomach pain. Some instructions involve massages or hot compresses. Others are purely magical, relying on chants, incantations, and ritual objects. There is a rhythm to the recording. Repetition lulls you into a gentle focus, almost like meditation. You press wedge after wedge, sometimes pausing to inhale the earthy aroma of dried herbs. Outside, the city carries on. You hear the faint bray of donkeys, the chatter of neighbors, and the splash of water from nearby canals. The contrast between the precise world of medical recording and the chaotic hum of life outside makes you smile. Life, it seems, is always a mixture of order and mess. By late afternoon, the tablets are complete. You stack them carefully, mindful of their fragile edges. Each tablet represents knowledge, sometimes practical, sometimes eccentric, always human. You step back, stretch your cramped fingers, and glance around the small workspace. The light filters softly through the reed blinds, casting long, warm shadows across the clay-strewn floor. The quiet satisfaction of the work washes over you. Tomorrow, you'll be back to counting grain or recording contracts, but today, you have preserved a small piece of Babylonian healing, blending observation, superstition, and human ingenuity in wedge-shaped permanence. You tuck your stylus away and step outside, the warm breeze brushing against your clay-stained tunic. You inhale, thinking of the smells, the sounds, the bustling city, and feel a profound connection to the tiny, persistent details that make life and history so vividly enduring. You might think that recording rituals and temple offerings is the peak of a scribe's responsibility, but your work also extends deep into politics and law. As the afternoon sun fades, you're summoned to the palace archives to copy decrees, contracts, and legal rulings. You trudge along narrow streets, clay dust coating your sandals, and pass merchants closing their stalls and children chasing stray goats. The palace feels both familiar and intimidating, a monumental mud brick structure that hums with authority. Inside, scribes bustle about, tablets clutched to their chests, voices low but urgent. Today, your task is a batch of legal contracts, sales of land, marriage agreements, and a few unusual cases that read like disputes over who gets the best goats. Your stylus hovers, ready to transform spoken words into enduring clay marks. Mistakes here aren't just embarrassing, they could affect someone's property, livelihood, or social standing. Historians still argue whether scribes had discretion in interpreting ambiguous decrees or if they merely acted as impartial recorders. Either way, your fingers tremble slightly as you begin. The contracts are precise, almost ritualistic in their wording. Each party's name, lineage, and promise must be noted accurately. One misaligned wedge could mean the difference between 2 goats and 3, which in this society is a serious deal. You marvel at the level of detail, land measurements, boundaries, the exact number of livestock, even the names of witnesses. It's like a combination of law school and accounting, with the added pressure of permanent ink, or rather, permanent clay. Quirky tidbit, archaeologists have discovered some tablets with what appear to be tiny corrections, erased wedges, scribbles, and even doodles of annoyed scribes' faces in the margins. You imagine your fellow scribes sighing mid-contract, muttering, "Yes, yes, I get it. 3 goats, now leave me alone." It's comforting to know that ancient bureaucrats had the same petty frustrations we do. As you press wedge after wedge, you notice reoccurring disputes. Neighbors squabbling over shared irrigation channels, merchants trying to claim more than their fair share of grain, even a case where a man attempted to sell his donkey twice. You suppress a laugh, imagining modern lawyers shaking their heads over the same antics. The palace archivists glance at your work, frown at a misaligned mark, and grunt in approval. That's the closest you'll get to a compliment today. Politics isn't limited to contracts, of course. Kings issue edicts on tax rates, festival dates, or military levies, and scribes are the conduit.
You copy these decrees with precision, feeling the weight of authority in every wedge. Miswriting could lead to misunderstandings, riots, or worse. You pause, imagining a confused farmer reading an incorrect tax tablet and throwing his barley into the river in protest. While you write, you notice the smell of ink lamps burning nearby and the distant clatter of guards pacing. The air is tense but rhythmic, like a quiet orchestra of administration. You trace each wedge slowly, savoring the tactile satisfaction while remaining acutely aware that this is history in motion. By evening, your stack of completed tablets grows tall, each one a permanent testament to disputes, resolutions, and social order. You feel a quiet pride. Without scribes, kings could issue decrees into a void, contracts would dissolve into arguments, and civilization would be a messy, unrecorded chaos. You brush your hands off, noting that tomorrow you'll return to this same room, same stylus, same clay, continuing the delicate balance of law, politics, and memory.
Hey guys, tonight we step into a world where the sun rises over the endless sands of the Nile, painting the desert in soft golds and pale pinks. You trudge barefoot across warm, gritty soil, inhaling the scent of fresh bread baking in clay ovens and the faint tang of papyrus along the riverbanks. You probably won't survive this if you're imagining yourself as a pharaoh, since your survival skills at navigating mud, sandals, and unpredictable crocodile sightings are questionable at best. Yet here you are, ready to immerse yourself in the rhythm of daily life in an ancient Egyptian village, where each movement, each sound, and each whisper of wind has a story to tell. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Share in the comments your location and local time, so we can drift through history together in real time. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The day begins quietly, with the first light stretching over the horizon. You can feel the warmth creep over your skin as villagers emerge from mud brick homes, shaking out mats, tending small hearths, and carrying pitchers of water drawn from the Nile's gentle current. Chickens cluck nervously, and a donkey brays somewhere off in the distance, reminding you that this world is alive in subtle ways. Women kneel by shallow basins, washing clothes, occasionally pausing to adjust the folds of their linen tunics. Men gather ropes, baskets, and simple tools, preparing to head to the fields or the workshops, their movements economical yet deliberate, honed by years of routine. Even children have assigned tasks, chasing stray geese, stacking reeds, or fetching water from communal wells, learning the ways of village life before they even notice it. You step lightly along the sandy path, careful not to disturb the rhythm, feeling the granular warmth of earth beneath your feet, and noticing the tiny details, a stray cat winding around sandals, the glint of sunlight on polished bronze amulets, the faint smell of baking bread mingling with river reeds. Historians still argue whether village artisans had formal apprenticeships or simply learned through observation and imitation, but as you watch, the process seems intuitive, almost meditative. The village's social rhythm unfolds naturally. Elderly men sit in the shade of date palms, leaning on staffs, exchanging quiet conversation, while younger men head to work in the fields or along the riverbank. You catch glimpses of water jars glinting in the morning light, reeds being bundled for roofing, and baskets carefully loaded with vegetables or fish. Even in this ordinary flow, there are quirks. A cat swipes a fish, a child darts to chase a bird, and a dog barks at its own shadow. The simple unpredictability of daily life punctuates the meditative rhythm, reminding you that even in a structured society, chaos sneaks in and adds texture. Food preparation is another sensory layer. You notice women grinding grain with stone mortars, the gritty powder filling the air with a slightly nutty scent. Water is drawn from shallow pools, stirred to clarity and poured into clay jars for storage. Bread loaves are scored with simple patterns,
crosses, lines, or small sun motifs, and then set to bake in open hearths. There's a quiet humor in watching the baker pat a particularly stubborn dough into submission, grumbling under his breath in a way that seems oddly relatable across millennia. Scholars debate whether these early breads were daily staples or reserved for ceremonial purposes, but the smell tells you they are central to life here, bridging sustenance and ritual. You begin to sense the connection between the natural environment and human activity. The sun is climbing steadily, casting long shadows that stretch across sand and stone. You notice the birds on the rooftops, the flicker of light through palm fronds, and the occasional splash of water as fish jump in the Nile. These moments are not just background, they define the day's rhythm. You imagine villagers tracking the sun's position unconsciously, orienting their movements to shadow and light, measuring time without clocks, and it feels both intimate and vast. You remember, almost fondly, that later in the day, priests will interpret the shadows with solemnity, reading messages from Ra himself. Even chores become meditative. Children carry water with a sense of ceremony, the splashing rhythm marking seconds in their playful calculus. Adults sweep the courtyards, their brooms tracing slow arcs across sun-warmed floors. You can hear the soft scratching of reeds against mud, the distant murmur of conversation, and the occasional bray or cluck. There's humor here if you choose to see it. A chicken suddenly dashes through a line of neatly stacked baskets, or a boy trips over a reed bundle, laughter spilling into the air. Life in the village is structured, yes, but it's never dull, and you can feel the pulse of humanity in these gentle, small disruptions. Historians still argue whether daily life was primarily dictated by environmental necessity or social hierarchy, but standing here, you can sense the intertwined layers. Villagers navigate not just physical spaces, but social rituals, inherited knowledge, and unspoken etiquette. Every interaction, from greeting a neighbor to tending a hearth, carries meaning beyond mere survival. You can almost feel the subtle choreography. Hands moving deftly, voices softening in reverence near sacred spaces, and a collective attentiveness to rhythm and routine. You notice the smallest details, like the careful stacking of reeds for shade or the precise pouring of water into clay jars, and recognize them as threads in a complex, quiet tapestry of life. By early morning, the sun has warmed the village thoroughly, and the hum of activity reaches a gentle crescendo. The baker's loaves are golden, the river shimmers under sunlight, and the smell of bread, herbs, and river reeds mixes into a calm yet vivid sensory landscape. You take a deep breath, noticing how the warm air carries both dust and sweetness, the smell grounding you in this moment. As you walk along narrow alleys observing villagers at work, you begin to feel part of the rhythm, like an unnoticed chord in a living melody. Quirky moments continue to surface. A child balances precariously on a low wall, a dog steals a loaf and is promptly chased, and you chuckle softly at these small, timeless dramas. Your imagination begins filling gaps in the narrative. You picture the sounds that cannot be captured, whispers of prayers, distant drums signaling market time, and the subtle creak of boats tethered along the riverbank. Each sound, each movement becomes a layer of immersion, and you notice how the village's gentle chaos is ordered by centuries of habit and custom. Observing a woman grind grain with rhythmic precision, you imagine how that small motion has repeated for generations, creating continuity and comfort in an ever-changing natural world. Scholars debate whether rituals were practical or symbolic, but watching them in real time, you feel both. By late morning, shadows grow shorter, and the day begins hinting at midday rest. Villagers pause, gathering under palm fronds or in shaded courtyards, exchanging brief conversations. You notice a quiet, almost sleepy energy settling over the scene. The river laps lazily, a soft undertone to the meditative sounds of daily life. Even the sun seems to move slower, casting gentle warmth without harshness.
You imagine villagers tracking the sun's position unconsciously, orienting their movements to shadow and light, measuring time without clocks, and it feels both intimate and vast.
You follow the baker from the village square to a quieter courtyard, where he keeps a small collection of tools, each one worn and polished by years of use. You notice the slender shadow stick resting at a precise angle against a low wall, its tip pointing toward a faint line etched into the stone. It's simple, almost comically minimalist, a stick and a mark, but it's enough. Ancient Egyptians used such devices to track the sun's movement, marking time not in minutes, but in gradually shifting shadows. As you lean closer, the fine grooves scratched into the stone catch the light, and you imagine generations of villagers squinting at them, adjusting their daily chores according to these tiny, dependable cues. Historians still argue whether these instruments were accurate enough to schedule complex tasks, or if their main purpose was ritualistic, reinforcing the sacred connection between sunlight and human activity. You pick up a small mercat, a wooden sighting tool, and hold it up as if aligning the stars above. The tool feels surprisingly heavy considering its simplicity, and you wonder at the patience required to use it properly. Priests reportedly used mercats in pairs, sighting along the night sky to determine hours, dates, or even the best time to plant crops. There's a quirky detail here. Some mercats were cleverly disguised as decorative objects for the wealthy, like small staves with inlaid ivory or ebony, suggesting that practicality and prestige often walked hand in hand. You trace your fingers along the polished wood, imagining a young apprentice learning to read the heavens while avoiding the occasional distraction of a particularly persistent cat in the courtyard. By mid-morning, shadows are already stretching, and the stick in the courtyard is showing its first long line. You crouch beside it, noticing the subtle curve cast across the sand, a delicate dance between geometry and sunlight. It's fascinating how a simple stick can divide the day, a reminder that the Egyptians' understanding of time was observational rather than abstract. You remember reading that they divided daytime into 12 hours, but the actual length of an hour varied with the season. Some hours felt long in winter and short in summer, which seems oddly flexible compared to our rigid clocks, but it makes sense when you think of life guided by nature rather than numbers. Historians still debate the methods used to ensure consistency across different regions, but here in this quiet courtyard, it seems almost irrelevant. You wander to another corner, where a group of scribes hunch over papyrus, marking diagrams and notes. They observe the shadow's movement and record tiny increments, combining practical necessity with meticulous artistry. One scribe glances up at you as if to say, "Don't touch my work, it's magic," which feels surprisingly relatable. There's a fringe theory that some mercats doubled as teaching tools, letting apprentices grasp both geometry and astronomy in one gentle lesson. Watching them, you imagine tracing invisible lines with your finger across the sunlit courtyard, a slow-motion game connecting earth and sky. The air carries the faint aroma of reed ink and dust, mingling into a smell that is both grounding and slightly mysterious.
The afternoon sun has mellowed, and you stroll toward a temple whose limestone walls glow softly in the warm light. You notice how the sun casts elongated shadows across the facade, turning engraved hieroglyphs into playful silhouettes. Walking along the path, you can almost hear the faint rustle of linen robes and sandals against stone, and the distant murmur of chanting as priests move in measured patterns. The sunlight itself seems to carry significance here, more than just illumination. It is an actor, a guide, and a spiritual marker.
Egyptians believed that Ra, the sun god, sailed across the sky each day, bringing life and order, and you feel that narrative subtly shaping every movement in the courtyard. Historians still argue whether shadow worship was more symbolic than functional, but as you linger, it's hard to separate the two. You pause to watch the shadow of a tall obelisk stretch across the temple floor. It's elegant, almost teasing in its simplicity, yet it serves as a precise instrument for tracking hours, ceremonial timings, or even seasonal festivals. You notice a quirk. One particularly small shadow mark seems to wobble slightly at midday, leading villagers to tell humorous stories about Ra momentarily napping and the sun misbehaving. You smile, imagining a priest nudging a colleague and whispering, "See, even the gods need a break." The balance of precision and playfulness is subtle, yet it suffuses every stone, carving, and gesture around you. As you wander deeper into the temple, you catch sight of priests manipulating sundials, merkets, and shadow sticks. Each device is carefully calibrated, sometimes in pairs, sometimes standing alone. You notice the tactile nature of the work, wood and stone polished smooth, inked lines and tiny carvings marking minutes and hours, and a faint dusting of sand from the courtyard. Fringe studies suggest that some shadow sticks doubled as astrological teaching tools, letting young apprentices connect celestial patterns to earthly life in a single, contemplative exercise. Watching them, you feel an almost meditative calm, as if time itself were slowing to match the movement of shadow across stone. The gardens beckon, their tranquility a soft counterpoint to the structured measurement of time. Lotus blooms hover above shallow pools, their petals opening and closing with a delicate rhythm. You inhale the sweet, watery scent, noticing how each plant casts tiny, dappled shadows that shift as the sun moves. Some scholars argue that garden placement mirrored cosmic principles, arranging flora in ways that reflected celestial balance. Others suggest the designs were purely aesthetic, a space for leisure and contemplation. Either way, walking among these quiet pools, the gentle sound of water lapping its stone edges, you feel a profound link between observation, beauty, and spiritual reflection. You notice the priests performing their rituals, hands raised to trace the sun's arc, lips moving in soft incantations. Occasionally, one glances at a shadow stick, adjusting its angle minutely, as though checking the alignment of heaven and earth. The curious part is that some rituals incorporated tiny whimsical elements, painted cats, miniature obelisks, or feathered charms meant to correct the sun's course if Ra felt mischievous. It's both earnest and playful, reflecting a culture where humor, observation, and reverence coexisted in subtle harmony. You breathe deeply, letting the scent of lotus and warmed limestone settle into your senses. You wander to a shaded colonnade where carved reliefs illustrate gods interacting with mortals. Shadows from columns ripple across the walls, creating a soft, animated effect as the sun drifts lower. You notice a small, curious carving of a sunboat, its tiny crew, both human and divine, casting micro-shadows on the stone, reminding you that light, art, and function often intersected seamlessly. Historians still debate the symbolic meaning of these carvings. Were they instructive, devotional, or simply decorative? Observing them now in the shifting light, you feel the layers of intent intertwine effortlessly. The gentle lapping of the river nearby mingles with the muted sound of temple chants, and you notice the rhythmic movement of shadows over a mosaic floor. Each figure, each symbol, shifts as the sun moves, creating a slow-motion dance of light and geometry. Fringe interpretations suggest these shifting shadows were used to determine auspicious times for specific rituals, while others argue it was a byproduct of architectural aesthetics. Either way, You feel yourself lulled by the pattern, a quiet, predictable motion that also allows for gentle surprise, like the way a feather drifts unpredictably on a soft breeze. A child of a priest appears, tracing a tiny shadow on the floor with a finger, giggling quietly as the elongated line wobbles and shifts. It's an endearing reminder that observation is not solely scientific or spiritual. Sometimes it's playful. The shadow stick, the merket, and the obelisk all have a dual nature, precise instruments for understanding time and cosmos, yet objects of curiosity and amusement, inviting engagement and gentle learning. You remember the earlier village courtyard, the baker's stick, the scribe's playful notes, and notice the same continuity here, a blend of function, humor, and subtle ritual. The late afternoon sun warms your shoulders as you wander into a small chamber lined with alabaster vessels, each designed to hold oils, perfumes, or sacred waters. Light filters through narrow slits in the walls, casting thin ribbons of shadow across the floor. You notice how priests occasionally align the vessels to catch sunlight in specific ways, enhancing fragrance or visual effect. Some scholars argue these arrangements were functional, aiding in measurements for rituals, while others suggested they were symbolic, creating a visual representation of divine order. You lean back, absorbing the layered interplay of light, scent, and geometry. As evening approaches, the shadows lengthen dramatically. The obelisk in the courtyard now projects a long, elegant line across stone and sand, guiding the final moments of temple activity. Priests perform closing rituals, subtly adjusting instruments to mark the transition from day to night. Fringe stories tell of mischievous spirits stretching shadows at dusk, adding a light-hearted dimension to otherwise solemn proceedings. You feel yourself smiling, imagining the playful negotiation between humans and unseen forces, order and whimsy. The temple is quieter now. The sun dips toward the horizon, bathing the courtyard in amber light. You notice small details, a lizard curling in a shadow's cool edge, the faint glint of ink lines etched into papyrus, the slow sway of lotus blossoms. Even the simplest shadows, the stick in the corner, the pillar's columns, tell stories of time, observation, and human attention to detail. Historians still argue whether daily shadow readings influenced broader architectural or ritual planning, but here the evidence is clear. Life and time are intimately intertwined. Nightfall edges closer, and you find yourself seated on a stone bench, watching the temple shadows fade and stretch, imagining the journey of Ra across the sky. You reflect on how shadow sticks, merkets, and sundials mediate human understanding of natural cycles, blending science, art, spirituality, and playful observation. A gentle breeze carries the scent of the river and blooming lotus, and you feel the slow, rhythmic cadence of life in this ancient place settle over you. Quirky anecdotes, sleeping cats, mischievous children, wobbly shadow lines soften the precision, making it all feel human and relatable. By the time the last golden rays fade, you are wrapped in the quiet majesty of the temple, the rhythm of shadow and sun, and the gentle humor woven through observation. Every stone, stick, and mark holds a story, subtle yet profound, reminding you that time in ancient Egypt was both measured and experienced, observed and played with. You breathe in slowly, letting the soft, ambient sounds, distant river, faint chants, fluttering leaves settle into your senses as the temple and its shadows linger in your imagination.
You step from the temple courtyard into a walled garden, and immediately the scents shift, sweeter now, softer, a mix of lotus, mint, and freshly tilled soil. Sunlight filters through tall papyrus stalks, casting flickering, almost playful shadows across the smooth stone paths. The garden seems alive in a quiet way. Bees hover above blooms, small birds hop between reeds, and the occasional frog croaks lazily near shallow pools. Walking slowly, you inhale deeply, noting the layered fragrances and imagining how the Egyptians themselves experienced these gardens not just as ornamental spaces, but as places for reflection, learning, and leisure. Historians still argue whether palace gardens were primarily spiritual spaces, practical food sources, or a combination of both, but for now, you can feel the intentional calm they inspired. The paths wind gently, lined with low hedges and flowering plants, many of which you recognize and many that seem entirely foreign. You stoop to touch a soft lotus petal, feeling its cool, delicate texture against your fingertips, and notice a curious hummingbird-sized insect hovering nearby, shimmering in sunlight. Some scholars suggest that specific plants were cultivated not just for aesthetic beauty, but for subtle medicinal properties, while others argue the arrangements were purely ceremonial, designed to mirror the order of the cosmos. You pause to admire a circular pool at the center, where lilies float serenely, reflecting golden sunlight like tiny mirrors, each ripple catching a fragment of sky. As you wander further, a gardener emerges, carrying a basket of fragrant oils, freshly harvested herbs, and tiny papyrus bundles. He hums softly as he arranges the plants, brushing the leaves with gentle hands, and you notice the meticulous care he gives even the smallest shoots. Fringe accounts suggest some of these gardens contained hidden compartments for rare or sacred herbs, known only to select priests or healers. You watch him sprinkle water over the papyrus roots, the droplets glinting in the sun, creating miniature rainbows that dance across stone edges. There's a subtle humor in imagining a tiny, invisible audience of gods observing each droplet's path, nodding in approval, or mild disappointment, depending on the day. You pause to sit on a low stone bench, feeling the sun warm your shoulders and noticing the gentle rustle of leaves. The garden paths are narrow, winding between pools and flower beds, and you find yourself following the patterns of sunlight and shadow across the ground. Some historians debate whether the layout of these gardens was inspired by symbolic representations of the Nile itself, with canals and pools mimicking the river's branching paths. Watching the movement of water and shadow, you can almost see the logic of this design, a natural choreography connecting life, leisure, and spiritual contemplation. A small fountain trickles quietly nearby, the water creating a soft rhythm against stone. You lean in, listening to its gentle melody, and notice a quirky detail. Tiny fish swim in precise patterns, occasionally nudging a floating petal. Some scholars suggest that specific fish were thought to bring good luck or act as tiny ceremonial participants, though scholars still argue whether their inclusion was functional or symbolic. You watch a dragonfly skim the surface, its wings catching the sunlight and reflecting fragments of garden magic in midair. The juxtaposition of playfulness and precision seems quintessentially Egyptian. Life observed, curated, and gently celebrated. Wandering past a line of fragrant herbs, you notice a small patch of blue flowers that you later learned were valued not for scent, but for medicinal application, used in oils or poultices for minor ailments. Some of these plants have peculiar histories, stories of ancient deities or legendary healers who recommended them for curious conditions, like calming restless children or aiding concentration during study. You smile at the thought, imagining a scribe carefully selecting petals to improve focus, while a mischievous cat swipes at the bundle, creating minor chaos. The interweaving of practical use, symbolic meaning, and gentle mischief seems to define this garden as much as the water or stone paths. Birds call softly in the distance as you meander along a shaded canal lined with reeds. Water trickles over tiny stone spouts, creating a hypnotic, almost ASMR-like rhythm that draws your attention to the present moment. You notice patterns in the sunlight,
small beams filtering through papyrus stalks, casting dancing shadows on the smooth stones. Fringe theories suggest that these subtle light effects were intentionally designed to enhance meditation or ritual, though some historians argue that it was simply an aesthetic choice. You lean back, feeling the gentle hum of life in the garden, observing the way every sound, shadow, and scent contributes to a slow, calming sensory experience. A gardener adjusts a small trellis, guiding flowering vines to form gentle arches over pathways. You duck under one, feeling the soft brush of petals against your forehead, and notice the serene smile of the gardener, content with the precise arc of growth. Some fringe accounts mention that these arches were symbolic doorways, guiding both humans and spirits through sacred spaces, though there's debate over whether this belief was universal or localized to specific palaces. You feel yourself walking deliberately, following not just paths, but the subtle choreography of design, letting your pace sync with the garden's rhythm. You pause near a small stone basin, its surface covered with floating petals. The scent is faintly sweet and calming, and you realize that the Egyptians understood the psychological power of fragrance, using it in both leisure and ritual. You dip a finger in the water, feeling its coolness contrast with the warmth of stone under your hand, and watch the ripples carry petals in soft, spiraling patterns. Historians still argue whether scent was primarily ceremonial or simply a pleasant luxury, but the sensory experience is undeniable. You inhale deeply, letting your breath synchronize with the slow, hypnotic motion of water and petals. In the late afternoon, the garden shadows lengthen, creating pockets of shade that shift gradually across pools, paths, and flower beds. You notice a priest and an apprentice carefully noting sunlight patterns, using them to determine optimal planting spots for the next season. There's a subtle humor in imagining the apprentice's frustration when a mischievous frog interrupts measurement and splashes water onto carefully arranged reeds. Fringe theories suggest that some gardeners embedded symbolic markers in the garden's layout, invisible to the casual visitor, to teach lessons about time, order, or cosmic cycles. You find yourself observing both nature and human interaction in equal measure, the combination creating a gentle, almost hypnotic cadence. As the sun dips lower, golden light glints off the lotus pools, turning the water into a tapestry of amber and green. You notice small insects skimming the surface, casting delicate shadows that join the interplay of light and water. The air is filled with soft scents of herbs, mud, and flower petals, and you feel a quiet sense of completeness. Life observed, ordered, and celebrated in microcosm. Some historians debate whether the gardens were primarily for elite contemplation or community utility, but here the effect is universal, a slow, immersive journey through scent, sound, and sight. By evening, shadows from the towering papyrus stalks stretch across the ground, merging with fading sunlight to create a soft, warm glow. Birds settle among reeds, frogs croak a steady lullaby, and the gentle trickle of water completes a soothing symphony. You stroll along winding paths, mindful of each footfall on warm stone, each gentle breeze brushing against your skin, and the subtle movements of petals in the water. Quirky observations: the frog that leaps at the wrong moment, the dragonfly skimming too close, the slight wobble in a petal's shadow, add life and gentle humor to the precise, orderly environment. Finally, you pause at the garden's exit, feeling the day's warmth and calm settle into your body. The interplay of sunlight, shadow, fragrance, and sound has created a slow, immersive meditation, a tactile, visual, and olfactory exploration that blends observation, ritual, and quiet amusement. You take one last deep breath, noticing the way every element, stick, shadow, petal, ripple, contributes to a subtle mastery of time, space, and life itself. The garden, like the village and temple before it,
leaves you with a gentle, reflective sense of harmony and calm, a perfect segue into the next chapter of shadow, observation, and human ingenuity.
Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into ancient Egypt, where the desert meets the green ribbon of the Nile. Picture the river at dawn, wide and calm, a mirror that catches the first streaks of pink light while ibis birds flap lazily above. The air is still cool, though you already sense the day will bring heat heavy enough to flatten you if you're not used to it. In fact, you probably wouldn't survive the first week here without some serious acclimation, and that's before the local mosquitoes even get a taste of you. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching, go ahead and let me know your location and the local time down in the comments. I always love seeing where in the world you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake on a reed mat, the smell of smoke from last night's small cooking fire still faint on your clothes. The clay walls of your mud brick house are warm to the touch even at sunrise, already storing up the heat of the day like a patient oven. Somewhere nearby, a rooster you don't own insists on becoming everyone's alarm clock. Chickens, by the way, were latecomers to Egypt, but in this imagined morning, one struts past anyway because historical timelines don't always match what you picture. And historians still argue whether domestic fowl were introduced here around the New Kingdom or much later. Stepping outside, you hear the village beginning to stir. The Nile gleams just beyond the fields, the lifeline of everything around you. Without the river's flood, the soil would be dust and stone. With it, the land transforms into ribbons of green so intense they look like they've been painted on by hand. Mainstream history tells us that the flooding was fairly predictable, enough that entire calendars were built around it. Farmers prayed for a good flood, not too shallow, not too high, like Goldilocks with water levels. As you trudge toward the riverbank, the ground feels soft under your feet, still damp from irrigation channels cut by hand. Water buffaloes stand in the shallows flicking their tails, looking unimpressed with human industry. Somewhere a boy is already singing to himself as he drives a small herd of goats toward a patch of grass. If you're squinting, the whole scene looks timeless, as though this morning could be happening 3,000 years ago, or yesterday. You lean down, scoop up a handful of Nile water and watch it drip back through your fingers. It's murkier than you expected. Even in antiquity, Egyptians worried about water quality. Papyrus scrolls mention boiling and straining methods, though whether they worked effectively is still debated. One quirky tidbit, some texts recommend using crushed barley seeds to purify water, which sounds suspiciously like an excuse to brew more beer, but maybe that was just multitasking. The sun pushes higher, lighting the tops of palm trees until they glow like fiery spears. You smell bread baking already, flat loaves slapped onto hot stones. Families work together, with women and girls kneading dough while small boys stoke fires. The aroma is rich, nutty, and almost sweet. You can't help but feel a pang of hunger, though you remember that breakfast comes later. First, there are morning chores, and no, nobody has invented coffee yet, so you'll have to get through this on sheer Nile-side determination. Your neighbor waves as he passes, carrying a basket of fish strung together like a wriggling necklace. Fishing was one of the earliest Nile traditions, though the methods varied: nets, hooks, even harpoons for bigger catches. Some scholars say certain fish species were taboo to eat depending on the region. Imagine refusing a perfectly good tilapia because the local temple frowned upon it. Historians still argue whether those taboos were strictly enforced or just loosely observed. A small child runs past you barefoot, giggling, and tosses a mud ball that misses your head by inches. You realize sandals would have been a good idea, but shoes were optional luxuries for most villagers. The ground is uneven but soft, warm already. You hear the bray of a donkey, see its long ears twitch, and realize just how central these animals were. Donkeys hauled water jars, carried crops, and stubbornly resisted orders, pretty much the same as they do today. As the day begins, you sense the rhythm of life falling into place. Chores, meals, prayers, gossip, and endless work tied to the land. It's not glamorous, not filled with golden treasures or dramatic hieroglyphic epics, but it's life as most Egyptians knew it. Simple, repetitive, sometimes backbreaking, and yet strangely soothing, because everything has its cycle, as reliable as the river itself. You take one last look at the shimmering Nile. It seems calm now, but you know its mood shift. Gentle floods, violent surges, and years of drought that could make entire villages vanish. For this moment, though, it's a mirror to the rising sun, whispering the start of another day that looks so ordinary and yet carries the weight of millennia in its ripples. You shuffle back from the riverbank, stomach growling a little because it's finally time for breakfast. Now, don't expect scrambled eggs, pancakes, or a cinnamon latte here. Ancient Egyptian mornings are built on bread and beer. That's it. The so-called breakfast of champions. The bread is dense, coarse, and speckled with bits of chaff and grit that have sneaked in during the grinding of grain. The stones used to crush emmer wheat leave tiny fragments behind, so when you chew, it's a little like biting into a deliciously flavored sandpaper. Archaeologists studying mummies often find worn-down teeth, ground almost flat from decades of eating this crunchy delight. On the bright side, you won't need to floss tonight. Next comes the beer. Forget the frothy, golden drink you picture from your local pub. Egyptian beer is more like a thick, sweet, porridge-ish liquid. Sometimes it's chunky enough that you'd almost need a spoon. But in a land with a blazing sun and limited clean water, this murky brew is safe, filling, and, most importantly, mildly intoxicating. Perfect for taking the edge off another day in the fields. Historians still argue whether it was nutritious enough to count as a meal on its own, or if that's just wishful thinking from ancient farmers who didn't want to cook more food. The process of brewing involves baking a batch of half-cooked bread, crumbling it into vats, mixing with water, and letting it all bubble into a tangy concoction. Some batches even have dates or honey added, making them sweeter. You take a sip, feel the faint fizz, and imagine villagers clinking clay mugs together, mumbling something like cheers, though they probably didn't use that exact word. It's a surprisingly communal moment. As you sit cross-legged with a group, tearing hunks of bread and dipping them in a smear of beans or onions, you notice how central food is to daily rituals. Sharing is survival. Without the collective storage of grain in silos, carefully counted and taxed, of course, famine would strike far more often. One mainstream fact you might not realize, bakers often work directly for temples or estates, their production tied to religious offerings as much as to family tables. And yet, quirks abound. Records mention workers being paid in bread and beer rations. Imagine doing a full day of stone hauling and getting handed 5 loaves and 2 jugs at the end. Forget direct deposits or checks. Your paycheck is literally dinner. Sometimes the beer allotment was so generous, you wonder how anyone got anything done. Maybe that explains the occasional wobbly hieroglyph line carved on a tomb wall. There's also the matter of onions. Yes, onions. Egyptians adored them, so much so that some were placed in tombs as offerings. You chew into one now, sharp and spicy, your eyes watering. Was this breakfast or self-inflicted punishment? Hard to tell. Historians still debate whether onions had religious symbolism, possibly tied to their layered shape, or whether they were just cheap, abundant, and good at keeping away mosquitoes, or friends, depending on your breath. Children run by, their faces sticky from date syrup, laughing with mouths full of crumbs. Someone nearby tries to sing a tune while tapping a little drum, though it's too early for most people's taste. A sleepy father mutters that the beer isn't strong enough, and everyone chuckles knowingly. Humor hasn't changed much in 4,000 years. You take another bite, crunching through grit again, and think about how this humble meal has powered empires, monuments, and endless cycles of life along the Nile. It's not glamorous, but it's deeply human. Each chew ties you to thousands of years of breakfasts, the kind no one writes epic poems about, yet the kind that truly sustains a civilization. The sun climbs higher, shadows shorten, and your belly is finally full, though perhaps not comfortably so. Bread lodged in your teeth, a faint buzz from the beer, and the day stretches ahead. Time to stand, stretch, and wonder what scratchy outfit you're about to wear into this long, hot morning.
Your belly is full, your head is pleasantly fuzzy from that thick beer, and now comes the moment of deciding what to wear. Spoiler,
It won't be complicated. Ancient Egyptian wardrobes are not exactly bursting with options. Still, you tug at a folded length of linen and prepare yourself for the scratchy embrace of history's most practical fabric. Linen, spun from flax plants, rules every closet. Cotton and silk are still centuries away from strutting your stuff here. The threads are pale, almost white, and when freshly woven, they gleam faintly in the sun. But don't get too romantic about it. Most people's tunics are coarse, stiff, and about as comfortable as wearing a bed sheet that's been washed with gravel. Richer folk might enjoy softer, finely pleated linen that ripples elegantly when they move, while you, humble villager, wrestle with a fabric that feels like it's exfoliating your skin with every step. The mainstream fact is that Egyptians wore linen not only because it kept them cool, but also because they believed wool was ritually unclean. Wool might keep you warm, but in this climate, it just wasn't worth the sweat. So you wrap the garment around you, tie it with a simple belt, and try not to scratch. Historians still argue whether everyone pleated their clothes at home or if that delicate accordion style was reserved for the upper classes with servants who had the patience of saints. And here comes the fun part: accessories. You don't leave the house without a charm or two because protection from bad luck is always in fashion. Maybe you slip on an amulet in the shape of the Eye of Horus, a tiny faience bead strung on cord, believed to ward off illness and envy. Or perhaps a scarab beetle, carved from green stone, because who doesn't want a good luck bug hanging around their neck? Some folks even carried little figures of Bes, the short, squat, grinning household god, who was basically the ancient Egyptian version of a protective garden gnome. Quirky, yes, but effective, or at least reassuring. Children are smeared with protective ointments too, sometimes thick layers of oil and resins that glisten in the sunlight. One neighbor pats a squirming toddler coated like a roast chicken, muttering blessings under her breath. You've heard odd remedies about mixing crocodile dung with oil to keep away both sunburn and evil spirits. Maybe it works, maybe it just makes you unpopular at parties. Historians still argue whether crocodile dung sunscreen was widely practiced or just an outlandish recipe noted in a single medical scroll. Either way, you make a mental note to stick to shade. You glance at your reflection in a pot of water. Linen tunic, slightly uneven, amulet hanging awkwardly, hair cropped short. Hairstyles, by the way, are a big deal. Men and women often shaved their heads to escape lice and heat, then wore wigs on special occasions. These wigs could be elaborate, braided with beads, or sometimes just practical and short. You run your hand across your own sweaty scalp and decide you're grateful no one expects you to maintain glossy wig hair while herding goats. Makeup is another layer of the morning ritual, though not just for glamour. You rub a little black coal under your eyes, and instantly you feel both fabulous and shielded from the glare of the sun. Scientists have found that the lead-based compounds in Egyptian cosmetics may have helped prevent eye infections too. So yes, your eyeliner is medicinal. Somewhere an ancient scribe is rolling his eyes at modern beauty influencers, muttering, "He did smoky eye first." As you adjust your belt and sling a satchel over your shoulder, you realize you look remarkably similar to almost everyone else in the village. Fashion here isn't about standing out, but blending into the steady rhythm of the community. That being said, you can still imagine wealthier neighbors swanning by in pleated linen gowns, gold jewelry glittering, and perfumed cones of wax melting slowly atop their heads, releasing fragrance as they walked. Try not to stare. It's hard to look glamorous when you still got crumbs of gritty bread in your teeth. One last check. Amulet in place, eyeliner sharp, tunic only slightly itchy. You're ready. The sun has risen higher, the hum of insects fills the air, and farmers are already calling to one another across the fields. With breakfast settled and your outfit secured, it's time to head out and join the endless work waiting beneath the blazing Egyptian sky. By the time you peel yourself away from the heat of the fields, your skin feels tight from the sun, and you're grateful for the sudden coolness that comes when you step under the massive stone shadows of a temple. The shift is instant. Outside, brightness and sweat. Inside, gloom and a hush so heavy you almost feel guilty for breathing too loudly. The temple smells of resin and smoke. Incense burns in shallow bowls, tendrils of fragrant haze curling upward and clinging to the painted walls. The air is thick, perfumed, and a little dizzying after hours of dust and grain. You cough lightly, earning a glare from a priest who clearly thinks your lungs should be more respectful. Mainstream fact: Egyptian temples weren't simply places of prayer for everyone. They were the domain of priests, administrators, and the gods themselves. Ordinary villagers rarely entered the sacred inner rooms. They lingered in outer courts, bringing offerings of food, beer, or flowers. The idea of personal worship wasn't really the point here. This was about cosmic order, the balance of Ma'at, and making sure the sun didn't forget to rise tomorrow. Your sandals tap against smooth flagstones, and you crane your neck upward. Columns painted in bright colors soar into shadow, carved with lotus blossoms and papyrus stalks. Imagine a forest of stone frozen mid-bloom. The paint is still vivid in places, though chipped and dulled by time. Historians still argue whether temples were repainted regularly in brilliant shades, or whether the faded colors we see now better reflect how villagers experienced them in everyday life. Priests glide past in spotless linen, shaved heads gleaming, carrying trays of bread and jars of beer to set before statues of gods. You catch a glimpse of a gilded figure, perhaps Amun or Ra or Hathor, half hidden in flickering lamplight. To the worshippers, these statues weren't symbols. They were living embodiments of the gods, housed and fed like royal guests. You wonder, only half joking, if the gods got tired of beer and bread 3 times a day. Here's a quirky tidbit. Temple rituals could involve waking up the god each morning, with priests carefully washing, dressing, and even applying makeup to the statue. Imagine starting your day by putting eyeliner on a giant falcon-headed deity. It sounds absurd, but to the Egyptians, it was as serious as feeding your family. It kept the world turning. The chanting begins, low and rhythmic, echoing through the stone halls. Drums beat softly, a deep pulse you feel in your chest more than you hear with your ears. The words are in ancient hymns, praising the gods, promising devotion. You don't catch the details, but you don't need to. The cadence itself is lulling. Combined with the thick incense and cool shadows, you could almost fall asleep standing there. A draft of cooler air slides through the temple doorway, carrying faint street sounds back inside, the bray of a donkey, the squabble of children. It feels strange to remember the noisy, messy village life just outside, while standing here among solemn chants and glowing statues. 2 worlds side by side, one dust, sweat, and onions, the other smoke, silence, and shimmering gods. You linger a while longer, watching the dance of light and shadow on painted stone. Your eyelids grow heavy, lulled by the rhythm of the chants. But eventually, you step back out into the blazing sun, eyes watering at the sudden glare. The Nile gleams once more in the distance, and a barge is gliding lazily along the water, reed bundles stacked high on its deck. The temple's shadows fade behind you, but their coolness clings like a faint perfume, a reminder of gods who must be constantly appeased so ordinary mortals like you can keep trudging through another day.
The sun blazes overhead, and stepping back into its glare feels like walking into an oven. You squint toward the Nile, where barges drift slowly downstream, sails puffing with the faint breeze. The river is no longer just scenery, it's the highway of Egypt, carrying grain, stone, people, and gossip from village to village. You head closer, drawn to the steady creak of wood against current. The first thing you notice is the boats themselves. Made of planks lashed together, sealed with pitch and stuffed with reeds, they look fragile, almost flimsy, but they float with surprising confidence. The sails are square, made of linen that catches the sun until it glows like parchment. Crewmen pull ropes, their muscles taut, while others steer with long oars. The Nile is so calm compared to an ocean that most boats don't need to be massive, yet somehow these vessels carried blocks of stone for temples and pyramids. Mainstream fact, even the colossal obelisks weighing hundreds of tons were floated downriver on specially designed barges. Picture that. Your morning commute includes a skyscraper lying sideways. You step onto a smaller merchant barge and find yourself surrounded by bundles of reeds, jars of fish sealed with mud, and baskets of figs so ripe their sweet smell overwhelms the air. A trader grins, offering you a taste of dried dates, sticky and chewy, while another boasts about her basket of onions as if it were treasure. Commerce here is loud but oddly friendly, full of exaggerated claims and cheerful bartering. One quirky tidbit, Egyptians sometimes transported live birds in wicker cages stacked high on boats, their squawking echoing across the water. You can imagine the chaos, hundreds of honking geese crammed together, flapping wings while sailors shout over the noise. Historians still argue whether these river convoys were carefully scheduled under state control, or more like a free-for-all where private traders just shouted until someone listened. Either way, you're grateful you only have to ride along, not manage the inventory. The river air is different from the fields, cooler, carrying hints of water lilies and damp reeds. You lean against the rail, feeling the gentle sway as the boat cuts through the current. Fish leap occasionally, flashing silver, and a fisherman casts a net with a practice flick. His children splash nearby, laughing as they try to scoop up minnows with their hands. You almost forget the heat beating down, soothed by the rocking rhythm of the boat. On the opposite bank, you spot another barge passing, this one painted with bright red stripes. Its deck is crowded with pottery jars, and a group of musicians strum lyres and beat hand drums. Music on the Nile. It's part entertainment, part advertisement. Why not lure customers with a catchy tune? You half expect one of them to break into an ancient jingle for onions, but mercifully they don't. The boat glides past fields dotted with workers, then by clusters of papyrus reeds so thick they form floating islands. Birds nest among them, storks lifting off with heavy flaps of their wings. The river is alive, a constant hum of movement and sound, so different from the still sanctity of the temple. This is Egypt's bloodstream, carrying everything that sustains daily life. As you drift, your mind wanders to the bigger picture. The Nile doesn't just connect villages, it binds the whole kingdom. Pharaohs relied on this watery road to project power, to collect taxes, to feed armies. Without the river, there is no Egypt, only scattered desert settlements lost to the sands. You run your fingers along the warm wood of the boat, aware that every plank, every rope, every oar is part of a system that has lasted thousands of years. The boat pulls into a small dock, and you step on sun-bleached planks, ears ringing slightly from the shift in sound. Behind you, the crew calls out as they unload goods, fish for figs, reeds for pottery, onions for dates. The bartering begins again, loud and spirited, echoing across the water. You smile, realizing the Nile isn't just a river, it's a floating marketplace, a stage, a lifeline. And for the moment, you're part of its endless current.
You step into the rising heat, linen rustling as your sandals, if you're lucky enough to own them, scuff the packed earth. The path winds past low mud brick homes, each with clay jars stacked outside, and then opens onto the wide, dazzling spread of farmland. The Nile's gift lies before you, flat and fertile, a green carpet stitched with channels of irrigation water. This is where most Egyptians spend their waking hours, bent, sunburnt, and patient, coaxing crops from the soil. A farmer waves you over, gesturing toward a pair of oxen tethered to a wooden plow. The animals grunt and shuffle, their hooves sinking into damp ground as the blade cuts a shallow trench. It's not glamorous, but it works. And it's one of those mainstream facts. Egyptian agriculture was so efficient that it produced enough surplus grain to feed laborers, priests, and even entire armies. Without these endless hours in the fields, there would be no pyramids, no temples, no golden treasures, just a lot of very hungry people staring at an empty horizon.
The sun climbs quickly, harsh and unrelenting, reflecting off the wet soil until it feels like you're standing inside a baking oven. Sweat trickles down your temple, and you think longingly of shade. Workers sing as they labor, a rhythmic chant meant to synchronize movements. Their voices rise and fall like the river itself, steady and hypnotic. You try humming along, but you're offbeat. Your contribution earns you a few amused side eyes. Children dart between rows, chasing after frogs startled from their hiding spots. One boy shows you a small net woven from reeds, proudly declaring he'll catch fish for supper. You nod, though secretly you're wondering if you'd rather stick to bread. Frogs, fish, grain, it's all tied to the river, and the rhythm of flood and harvest keeps everyone's lives locked in its tide. And here's a quirky tidbit. Egyptian farmers sometimes trained baboons to help harvest figs. Yes, baboons. Imagine trying to manage a troop of furry coworkers who are just as likely to eat the produce as they are to hand it over. Whether this was a widespread practice or just a weird anecdote recorded once, historians still argue. But now you can't shake the image of monkeys running a fig farm with questionable efficiency. Back in the field, the plow moves slowly, carving its furrows as men toss seed into the damp earth. Women follow, pressing the grain lightly into place with their toes, rhythmic and careful. Everyone works together because the Nile's generosity has to be seized quickly. Miss the window and you risk losing a year's food supply. A gust of hot wind blows sand across the fields, stinging your eyes. You blink furiously, eyeliner smudging, and realize just how unforgiving this environment is. Without constant irrigation and endless human labor, the desert would reclaim these green strips in a heartbeat. That's why fields are lined with dikes and channels, all maintained by hand. A farmer crouches by one now, scraping mud into place to direct the trickle of water where it's most needed. You squat beside him, trying to help, though your efforts only result in a small mudslide. He laughs kindly, shakes his head, and shoos you back before you ruin the whole system. Overhead, a flock of geese honks noisily, circling before landing near the riverbank. Egyptians domesticated geese long before chickens became common here. Geese eggs and meat are valuable, though a bit gamey, and you realize that catching one would probably be a sport all its own. For now, the honking chorus becomes background music to the endless rustle of grain stalks in the wind. You glance at the horizon, shimmering in the distance, and think about how precarious this life must have been. 1 year of poor flooding could mean famine. Yet Egyptians managed for millennia, developing calendars, storage systems, and state granaries. Historians still argue whether ordinary villagers truly trusted the pharaoh to intercede with the gods for good floods, or if most people simply relied on their own stubborn luck. Either way, you keep your head down, push through the heat, and pretend you're used to it. Your back aches just from watching. You rub your shoulders, realizing you haven't even done the hard work yet. But that's the point. Daily labor here isn't glamorous or epic. It's repetitive, sweaty, and necessary. And yet there's a strange calm in it, a rhythm that lulls your thoughts, like the soft buzz of insects or the low chant of workers in the sun. The day stretches long, the Nile gleams, and you feel both exhausted and strangely soothed. Farming here is less about glory and more about survival. But it's survival that builds everything else: temples, palaces, even the history we're quietly wandering through right now.
Hey guys, tonight we are stepping into the worn-out shoes of a 17th-century postman. Imagine the faint ringing of a church bell in some foggy little town, still half asleep. The sun hasn't even tried to peek over the rooftops yet, and here you are, tugging on boots that are already damp from yesterday's mud. The whole village is silent, except for a rooster that clearly didn't get the memo about subtle wake-up calls. Your job? To deliver scraps of paper and folded parchment that could contain love, money, or just someone complaining about hay prices. It sounds noble until you realize most of your life is damp socks, heavy bags, and long miles. Honestly, you probably wouldn't survive a week of it, unless you've got a secret passion for blisters. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now.
I love knowing who's winding down on the other side of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The morning bell rings and you shoulder your post bag. It's heavier than you'd prefer, but lighter than yesterday, and you already know which villages will get your grumpier side today. The post station where you collect your bag is no palace, more like a drafty stable converted into an office. There's always the faint smell of hay and horse sweat, mixed with wax from the seals on letters. You pick through the pile, some sheets of parchment for a nearby monastery, a long scroll bound with string for a tax collector, and a couple of personal notes sealed with sloppy blobs of red wax. You don't peek, of course, you're an honest postman, but you do imagine. Everyone imagines. Historians still argue whether early 17th century postal workers were allowed to carry private letters or only official ones. Some suggest that in many towns, the so-called Royal Mail ignored ordinary people, leaving private couriers like you to bridge the gap. Others argue that the division was fuzzy and villagers slipped coins into your hand to sneak letters into your bag alongside official dispatches. Either way, your bag feels like a strange blend of empire and gossip. You tighten the leather strap across your chest. The buckle squeaks. The strap is cracked. You tell yourself it'll last another season, though you know you'll end up trying to fix it with twine before long. Outside, the air is crisp. A mist clings to the fields, turning fence posts into ghostly silhouettes. Somewhere in the distance, a cow moos, sounding as tired as you feel. A mainstream fact here. In 17th century Europe, bells really did mark time since most villagers lacked clocks. You lived your life by tolling metal, whether you liked it or not. The bell doesn't ask if you're ready, it just tells you the road won't wait. As you adjust your bag, you glance at the letters again. The handwriting fascinates you. Some elegant loops of ink, some frantic scratches like the writer was in a hurry, or drunk, possibly both. There's always one letter with smudged ink, like the sender sneezed halfway through. You wonder if their loved one will laugh or just squint in frustration. A quirky tidbit. In some towns, postal workers were rumored to be able to read letters without opening them. Not actual magic, of course, but they supposedly studied the outside so carefully, handwriting, seals, even the thickness of paper, that they could guess contents. Imagine developing the Sherlock Holmes level of postal gossip just from sniffing parchment. You probably couldn't resist bragging about that skill in the tavern later. Today, you catch a faint smell of resin from one wax seal, likely frankincense, maybe shipped from far away. It's a little whiff of the world beyond your muddy roads, and it makes you grin despite your yawns. As the bell fades, you adjust your cloak, tug it tighter around your shoulders, and step outside the station's low door. The world is gray but expectant. Your boots crunch against gravel. Somewhere a dog barks, already warning the neighborhood that you're up to something suspicious. Delivering mail, the most scandalous of crimes. You think briefly about the monks down the road. They'll want their parchment before their midday meal, otherwise they'll grumble in Latin that you can't understand but definitely feel in your bones. The manor house wants their long scroll by tomorrow, but you'll try to get it there today, partly to avoid trouble, partly to avoid storing that heavy thing in your bag overnight. And the personal notes, you know, those are the real treasure. The villagers you hand them to will squint at the seals like they're holding the crown jewels. The morning air is damp, but you breathe it in. Better than the stale hay inside. Your legs already ache, though you haven't gone far, but there's a certain peace in the ritual. Step, bag shift, creak of leather, deep breath, repeat. You glance at the horizon. It's a pale smear, no sun yet, but enough to guide you. And somewhere down that road, miles away, someone is waiting for a folded square of parchment that might change their whole day, or at least give them a reason to gossip with their neighbor. And with that thought, you begin your route, bell still echoing faintly behind you, the day stretching ahead like one long parchment scroll waiting to be unrolled.
The road greets you the way it always does, with mud. Thick, slippery mud that sucks at your boots as though the earth itself is trying to steal your footwear. You set one foot down, it squelches. You lift it up, it makes that ridiculous slurping noise you swear could wake the dead. There's no escaping it. Roads in the 17th century are more suggestion than infrastructure. You start off anyway, one cautious step at a time. Your bag bumps against your hip, its weight swinging like a pendulum. Every few paces you adjust the strap, but it never feels right. Maybe it's designed to keep you humble. Mainstream fact. In most parts of Europe during this time, roads outside the biggest cities weren't paved at all. Royal highways occasionally had gravel or stone, but the moment you left those, it was dirt. Dirt that turned to dust in summer and knee-deep muck in spring. You, as the poor postman, don't get to choose the season. You try to picture what this same road will look like in a few months. Dry, dusty, perhaps even pleasant. But that's not today. Today, the mud tries to swallow your boot with every step. At one point, you nearly topple forward, arms flailing, bag swinging dangerously close to landing in a puddle. You recover, looking around sheepishly, even though the only witnesses are crows perched on a fence. One caws, as if laughing at you. You mutter something unrepeatable under your breath and keep going. Historians still argue whether couriers like you more often walked or rode horses. Some say the government-issued routes were almost always covered by mounted riders. Others point out that in rural areas, horses were expensive luxuries and most local messengers trudged on foot. You can feel your legs voting for the second theory right now. Your cloak doesn't help much. It's damp around the edges, already splattered. Still, you pull it tighter, trying to ward off the morning chill. You pass a hedgerow where frost clings stubbornly to the leaves. A hare darts across the path, startled by your crunching steps. For a fleeting moment, you envy the hare's speed. Imagine being that nimble instead of dragging this load like an unwilling mule. A quirky tidbit. Some postal guides from the era recommended carrying a spare pair of shoes, not for comfort, but because muddy roads were so likely to destroy them. Travelers wrote of abandoning ruined footwear in the muck and trudging on barefoot until the next town. You glance down at your own boots and quietly pray they make it to evening. If not, well, you can always blame occupational hazard when you turn them in for repairs. You come to a small bridge, or, well, what counts as one. Really, it's just a few planks across a stream. The water below gurgles cheerfully, mocking your cautious steps. You balance, arms out like a clumsy acrobat, and make it across without incident. Victory! You smile at yourself, half proud, half aware that no one else cares. That's the life of the postman. Small triumphs over mud and wobbly planks. The road curves, leading past a field where a farmer is already at work. He raises a hand in greeting, squinting at you from underneath his hat. You wave back, but don't stop. You know if you linger, he'll corner you with half an hour of complaints about taxes or crop failures. That's not gossip you're paid to deliver. Your bag shifts again, and you feel the scroll inside digging against your ribs. You curse the tax collectors silently. Nobles never think about how heavy their words are when they're wrapped in parchment and ribbon. Every step feels like you're carrying a brick in your bag. By now, the mud has caked around your boots, making them heavier with each mile. You scrape them against a rock, shedding some of the muck, though more will cling soon enough. It's like walking with ankle weights before gyms even existed. You tell yourself at least it's good exercise, though it doesn't feel like a consolation when your toes are freezing. The village bell behind you has long faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of your own trudging. The world feels quiet, like it belongs only to you and your letters. The mist lifts slowly, revealing hedges, thatched roofs in the distance, and the faint promise of the next stop. And through it all, the slurping mud, the swinging bag, the chilly air, you keep going. Because someone, somewhere, is waiting for you to appear at their door with ink-stained parchment. Whether it's a love note, a tax demand, or just an uncle reminding them about hay prices, you're the thin, muddy line connecting them all.
The road has flattened out now. Less mud, more rutted dirt. Your boots are still damp, but at least they're not being swallowed whole anymore.
The morning is brightening, the mist thinning into gentle wisps that cling stubbornly to low fields. Birds are louder here, sparrows darting between hedges, crows overhead, and the occasional goose honking as if it's auditioning for the role of roadside alarm clock. You pat the bag at your side. The letters rustle faintly, almost like they're whispering their secrets to one another. And here's the thing, you can't help but wonder. Each folded square, each parchment scroll sealed with wax is a locked door you'll never open. You're the courier, not the reader. But the curiosity still hums. Mainstream fact, by the 17th century, letters were folded into their own envelopes, self-sealing, with wax and string, rather than slipped into the paper envelopes we think of today. Privacy was, in theory, absolute. Of course, privacy is also a suggestion, and you can't help noticing how tempting those wax seals look. One particularly fancy letter juts against your ribs. Its seal is pressed with some kind of crest, probably belonging to a minor noble who insists on adding 3 extra flourishes just to remind you he's important. Another is less tidy, wax dribbled down the fold in a lopsided blob. You smile. Someone clearly struggled with their candle. Maybe they were in a hurry, or maybe they were just bad at it. Historians still argue whether peasants commonly wrote their own letters or relied on scribes. Literacy rates were uneven, and in some places, only priests or notaries could reliably scratch out correspondence. So when you see a clumsy blob of wax, you imagine some frustrated farmer squinting over his inkpot, muttering about how much trouble it is to write 2 pigs for sale. You shake the bag gently, listening to the muffled rustle. Each letter has its own weight, its own voice. You picture them not as paper, but as personalities traveling with you. The elegant scroll, that's the nobleman in the corner, demanding the best seat. The smudged one, that's the shy neighbor who always mumbles at the tavern. And the one that smells faintly of resin, that's the mysterious traveler leaning back with secrets they won't share. Quirky tidbit, some letters of this era were actually perfumed, dipped or dabbed with scented oils so that the aroma would linger even after long journeys. Imagine delivering a note that smells like lavender to someone who hasn't bathed in a week. You'd be doing them a favor just by handing it over. You sniff at the bag, half wishing one of yours carried such a pleasant distraction, but no luck today. Just parchment and faint wax smoke. As you trudge, your imagination runs wild. What if this letter with the sloppy wax seal is a love note? What if someone's heart is dangling in your bag, waiting to be dropped on a doorstep? You picture the scene, a blushing girl opening the fold, scanning the ink, smiling shyly at words written by candlelight. Or maybe she frowns, confused by the clumsy handwriting. Either way, you carried the moment in your muddy satchel. You chuckle. You know better than to get romantic. It's more likely a merchant nagging about late payment. Still, your brain insists on daydreaming. That's part of what keeps the miles moving. The morning air sharpens as the road narrows between hedgerows. A dog barks somewhere ahead, and you tense instinctively. Dogs are part of the job description no one told you about. You give your bag a reassuring pat, as though the letters themselves could ward off canine teeth. Back to your musings. You've heard rumors that some postmen, less honest ones, did, in fact, steam open seals, peek inside, and reseal them carefully. Was it curiosity? Spying? Maybe both. Historians still argue whether this was tolerated by officials or harshly punished when discovered. You, at least, stick to your daydreams. Letters feel safer that way. Better to imagine secrets than risk being caught with melted wax on your hands. The road rises slightly, giving you a view of fields stretching outward. Thin smoke curls from a distant chimney, promising warmth you won't feel for hours yet. You roll your shoulders and adjust the strap again, imagining the letters shifting, settling into their places. It almost feels like they sigh with you. Another mile slips by. You pass a low stone wall, mossy and uneven. You pause, leaning against it, catching your breath. Your bag is lighter than yesterday's load, but somehow your shoulders still ache. As you rest, you tap the edge of the bag gently, like drumming on a locked treasure chest. "What are you hiding in there?" you murmur. A crow nearby answers with a caw. You smile. "Thanks for the input." When you stand again, the bag feels a little friendlier, like it's sharing the walk instead of dragging you down. Letters, after all, are more than ink and paper. They're voices, stitched together across distance. And for a brief, silly moment, you feel like the world's quietest party host, carrying all those conversations to their waiting ears.
Your stomach growls. Of course it does. You've barely been on the road a couple of hours, and already the dream of bread and cheese is tugging at your mind like a particularly persuasive donkey. You pat your bag, letters on one side, food bundle on the other. One is noble duty, the other is survival. Guess which one you're more excited about. You find a spot by the side of the road, a low stone fence where the moss cushions your back if you lean just right. The air is brisk, but at least the sun is beginning to show itself, shyly edging over the horizon. You rummage through your satchel's side pocket and pull out a hunk of bread, yesterday's cheese, and a small flask that may or may not contain more water than ale. Don't judge, you're a postman in the 17th century. Hydration rules are different here. Mainstream fact, bread and cheese were indeed the staple diet of ordinary travelers in this period. Not fancy cheese, nothing that would make a Parisian swoon, just hard, salty stuff that survived a few days without turning into a science experiment. You gnaw at yours, breaking off bits with your teeth. It squeaks between your molars, a sure sign of both its freshness and its stubbornness. A quirky tidbit, ale in the 17th century was often safer to drink than water. Wells could be contaminated, rivers were shared with livestock, and let's just say clean drinking water wasn't exactly a catchphrase yet. Ale, mildly alcoholic and boiled in brewing, killed off most of what wanted to kill you, which explains why your hydration flask leaves you pleasantly warm after a swig. You chew slowly, letting the rhythm of eating distract you from the rhythm of walking. The bread is dry, crumbling a little, but dipped in ale, it softens into something almost comforting. You lean your head back against the stone and close your eyes for a moment, savoring. The sounds of the countryside surround you, birds squabbling overhead, a distant cow complaining, the shuffle of leaves in a breeze. Historians still argue whether postmen on rural routes received official rations from stations or were left to fend for themselves. Some records suggest inns along the way were paid to provide meals, but in practice, many travelers brought their own provisions to avoid expense or disappointment. Judging by the firmness of this cheese, you're definitely in the fend-for-yourself camp today. As you munch, your mind wanders. You picture nobles at their banquets, roasted meats, delicate pastries, sweet wines, while you sit here trying to gnaw through a crust that could double as a defensive shield. Still, there's something satisfying about it. You joke to yourself that this is farm-to-table dining, centuries before trendy cafes would charge extra for the concept. A dog barks in the distance again, sharper this time. You glance up, wary. Nothing appears, so you go back to your bread. Your joke quota for the morning is filled when you realize that the cheese smells faintly like your boots. You grimace, but keep eating. Hunger is a persuasive editor. By the time you finish, crumbs cling to your cloak, and the last sip of ale lingers warmly in your chest. You feel both heavier and lighter. Heavier in the belly, lighter in the spirit. For a moment, you even forget about the blisters forming in your boots. You brush off your hands, carefully tuck the flask away, and check the bag of letters. Still secure, still pressing against your ribs like impatient passengers waiting for their stop. You sigh good-naturedly and push yourself back onto the road. The next stretch is quieter. The world feels almost suspended. No farmers yet in the fields, no wagons rattling past,
just you and the slow crunch of your boots. The ale has softened your mood, and you catch yourself humming under your breath. Not a song anyone else would recognize, just a tuneless rhythm to keep your steps steady. You imagine how your day will look in 100 years. Will someone laugh at how quaint it seems to carry paper across mud for hours on end? Or will they envy the slowness, the quiet, the absence of ringing devices demanding attention every 5 minutes? Historians still argue whether postmen on rural routes received official rations from stations or were left to fend for themselves. You know firsthand that they were both harder and simpler. Harder on your feet, simpler on your mind. A gust of wind tugs at your cloak. You tighten it, tug the strap of your bag into place, and start walking again. The taste of bread lingers faintly, mixed with the tang of ale. It's not luxurious, but it's enough to fuel another mile, maybe 2. And so you move on, a little heavier in the belly, a little lighter in the spirit. Still the quiet thread weaving villages together, one folded letter at a time.
The rain eases, replaced by the quiet chatter of the road itself, boots squelching, bag creaking, and the occasional bird startled from the hedgerows. You're in the long middle stretch of your route now, where boredom and curiosity battle it out in your head. Fortunately, the road brings company. A farmer appears first, pushing a creaky wheelbarrow stacked with kindling. His hat sags low over his eyes, and he lifts it briefly to nod at you. You nod back, polite, careful not to slow down too much. You know from experience that if you pause, he'll launch into a 30-minute debate about whether the new tax collectors are secretly allergic to honesty. You let the nod do the talking and keep walking. Not long after, a group of children trails you for a few paces. They giggle at the sight of your bag, whispering as though it holds treasure. One brave boy asks, "Is it gold?" You chuckle and shake your head. "Better," you whisper. "It's words." They blink at you, confused, then burst into laughter as if you've just told the world's worst riddle. Before long, they peel off back to their cottages, still giggling. Mainstream fact: in the 17th century, children were often fascinated by letters because so few of them could read. A folded parchment sealed with wax was as mysterious as a locked chest, and the bearer of those secrets, yes, that's you, seemed almost magical. A quirky tidbit: some towns grew so familiar with their postmen that children would follow along the route to announce their arrival, like an impromptu parade. Imagine a gaggle of kids shouting, "Letters! Letters!" while you trudge, pretending you're not flattered. You wonder if you'll earn that kind of following one day, or if you'll just keep getting mocked for muddy boots. As the road curves, a dog trots out from a yard. You freeze. It stares, head cocked, tail stiff. Then, just as you prepare for battle, it bounds over and starts sniffing your satchel. You exhale in relief. The dog clearly has a nose for parchment, or maybe the faint whiff of cheese still lingering from your earlier snack. You gently push it away, laughing under your breath. "Sorry, boy, no bones in here, just overdue tax notices." The dog sneezes, unimpressed, and wanders back to its yard. Historians still argue whether rural postmen were seen as trusted figures or treated with suspicion. In some regions, villagers greeted the courier warmly, eager for news. In others, they eyed him warily, worried about spies or gossip. Judging from the mix of giggles and barking you've received today, the truth is probably somewhere in between. The road grows lively for a moment as you meet a peddler with a cart full of pots and pans. He jingles cheerfully as he passes, nodding and muttering something about the weather. You glance back and notice the children from earlier tailing him now, fascinated by the clanging metal. You can't help but smirk. Apparently, your bag of words lost its shine to shiny cookware. Typical. As you trudge on, you realize these small encounters keep the monotony at bay. Every nod, every bark, every giggle is a reminder that you're not just trudging through mud and drizzle, you're part of the living road,
woven into the daily rhythm of the countryside. You are, in a way, the moving gossip column of the 17th century. You glance down at the letters once again. They don't reveal their secrets, but you can imagine the voices waiting at the other end, the noble sniffing at muddy boots, the sweetheart clutching a folded note, the farmer sighing at overdue debts. And scattered along the way are the children, dogs, and curious strangers who make your day feel less like a lonely march and more like a wandering play. The sun peeks briefly from the clouds, casting a shimmer on puddles and glints on your damp cloak. You grin, just a little. For now, you're less a soggy scarecrow and more a reluctant hero, carrying not swords or gold, but words that will ripple out in laughter, arguments, sighs, and maybe even a kiss or two.
The road decides it has had enough of being polite. The sun creeps higher, but instead of warming you, it just makes the clouds of your breath look slightly ridiculous. Then the drizzle begins. Not a dramatic storm, not the cinematic kind of rain that lets you yell, "Curse the heavens!" Just a steady mist that seeps into everything. Your cloak absorbs it like a sponge. The shoulders go first, then the seams, and soon you feel each drop sliding down toward your elbows. You tug the hood tighter, but it only shifts the discomfort. The bag on your side seems to grow heavier, as if the letters themselves are sulking about the weather. The wax seals hold, thank goodness, but you picture their edges softening with every damp gust. The last thing you want is to deliver someone's heartfelt letters smelling like mildew. Mainstream fact: early mail routes in Europe didn't stop for weather. Rain, wind, even snowstorms, couriers were expected to push through. The motto of reliability wasn't carved into postal services yet, but the expectation was already there. If people had trusted you with their words, you delivered, soggy boots or not.
Hey guys, tonight we're stepping softly into ancient Egypt. You're standing beneath a velvet black sky pricked with stars, the air still warm from a sun that seems never to quit. Sand shifts under your sandals, and the faint rush of the Nile makes a background hum, nature's white noise machine. The pyramids loom in the distance, but tonight we won't be climbing those impossible slopes or peeking into cursed tombs. No, tonight we're focusing on something much smaller, much sillier, and, oddly enough, much more human. We're talking about the invention of the very first breath mints. Yes, the people who wrapped their kings in gold and linen also cared deeply about garlic breath. You probably won't survive this desert heat without a water bottle, let alone fit in with the locals, but at least you'll know their secret trick to smelling socially acceptable. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and the time where you're watching, whether it's midnight in Minnesota or early morning in Mumbai. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk slowly along a dusty path that edges the riverbank. The smell of mud and reeds mixes with something spicier, cinnamon perhaps, though it feels out of place in the middle of a marsh. Ancient Egypt is a land of paradoxes. Stone tombs that will outlast empires, and yet daily worries that feel oddly modern. Picture a fisherman hauling in Nile perch. He's sweaty, his teeth not exactly dentist approved, and when he goes to greet a priest, there's a social hurdle. No one likes the smell of fish breath, not even in 1500 BCE. This is why the Egyptians, masters of perfumes, oils, and incense, also dabbled in little nuggets of sweetness designed to mask the less glamorous realities of human existence. Historians still argue whether these concoctions should be called medicine, candy, or pure social armor. But either way, they tell you something important. Fresh breath mattered. Think about it. These were people obsessed with order, balance, and harmony. They painted their gods in symmetrical poses, aligned pyramids with the stars, and even organized their daily routines around the steady flooding of the Nile. Against that backdrop, bad breath wasn't just a nuisance, It was a disruption of cosmic balance. Imagine leaning in to whisper a prayer to Osiris only to gag halfway through because your mouth smelled like old onions. Not very sacred. The mainstream fact you can lean on here is simple. Egyptian texts from as early as the Middle Kingdom mention mixtures of honey and herbs for freshening the mouth. That's your evidence of early breath mints. But here's the quirky tidbit. One recipe supposedly included frankincense and cinnamon bound together with honey rolled into small pellets. Basically, the world's first Tic Tacs, except stickier. And here's your debate phrase for the night. Historians still argue whether these pellets were chewed daily, reserved for ritual, or used mostly as a cure for bad breath linked to stomach ailments. After all, Egyptian medicine liked to blur the lines between what we'd call practical and magical. Picture yourself now inside a modest mud brick home, lanterns flickering, the smell of stewed lentils hanging heavy in the air. A mother kneads dough for tomorrow's bread, her children squabbling over who gets the corner seat near the fire. And on the shelf in the corner, a tiny jar of sticky spheres. They're not snacks for kids, they're carefully rolled breath mints meant for father when he goes to the temple tomorrow. Practical, yes, but also a little ceremonial. You take one, cautiously. It's gritty, uneven, and tastes strange. Sweet, yes, thanks to honey. Spicy, too. Cinnamon, if you're lucky enough to afford it, though more often it might be a local herb. And faintly smoky, because resins like frankincense don't exactly dissolve cleanly in your mouth. Modern gum might win on flavor, but these little nuggets were doing their job 4,000 years ago. And here's your first joke tonight. Imagine an ancient Egyptian chewing away awkwardly, trying to impress someone at a banquet when a resin chunk gets stuck between his teeth. Ancient problem, no floss. Modern solution, still no one carries floss. The Nile drifts by, crocodiles lurking just beneath the surface. Somewhere upriver, traders are bringing cinnamon all the way from South Asia, proof that people will go to extraordinary lengths to not smell like yesterday's dinner. The world is wide, the desert's endless, and yet in the palm of your hand sits a tiny ball of honey and spice, a symbol of how deeply people have always cared about the small comforts. You close your eyes. The scent of incense wafts from a nearby temple, mingling with the minty spice aroma of those ancient pellets. Your breath feels fresher already, though it's probably just your imagination. Still, in the middle of a land obsessed with eternity, it's funny how much detail was lavished on something as fleeting as a single exhale. You're still lingering on the riverbank, but the night has deepened and the stars look sharper now, like someone polished the sky while you weren't looking. As you stroll toward the bustle of a nearby settlement, you start to notice how much emphasis people here place on presentation. Robes pressed as neatly as linen can allow, wigs carefully scented with oils, and, most importantly for our journey tonight, a rather invisible detail, their breath. You might think, really? Breath? Wasn't survival more pressing than smelling nice? But that's exactly where you'd be mistaken. For Egyptians, daily survival and spiritual survival were intertwined. To them, cleanliness and good smells weren't luxuries, they were moral duties. Little markers of respect toward others and the gods. Step into a temple precinct and you'll see priests wash multiple times a day, shave their entire bodies to maintain ritual purity, and burn incense constantly. You're expected to bring offerings, bow deeply, and yes, speak your prayers. Imagine doing that while reeking of yesterday's onions and beer. Awkward. The mainstream historical fact here, Egyptian etiquette demanded freshness. In fact, in some inscriptions, sweet breath is described as a sign of favor from the gods themselves. It wasn't just about social life, it was practically a divine endorsement. Now, picture yourself wandering into the courtyard of a temple in Thebes. Torches flicker, priests glide about in white linen, and incense coils upward like silk ribbons into the sky. Everyone is speaking softly, reverently, and there you are, edging into the crowd. Someone turns to greet you.
You can almost feel the tension because if your breath smells like last night's fish stew, you've ruined the atmosphere. Imagine walking into a yoga class today while holding a bag of fried onions. Same vibe. So you see, fresh breath wasn't just an afterthought, it was a requirement for ritual space, much like removing your shoes before entering certain sacred places today. The Egyptians, with their meticulous obsession for order, what they called ma'at, extended it to their mouths. Harmony had to flow from your words, your gestures, and, apparently, your exhalations. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some records suggest that Egyptians even considered bad breath a symptom of disharmony in the soul. Not just a dental problem, but a cosmic imbalance. So chewing one of those sticky pellets wasn't only about courtesy, it might have been about aligning yourself with the universe. You can laugh, but admit it, you've chewed gum before an Audrib interview, not just to keep from offending, but because it made you feel more put together. Same principle, just a 4,000-year head start. Now, historians still argue whether mints were common among everyday farmers and fishermen, or reserved for elites attending temple rituals and court banquets. Was it something every household whipped up with honey and herbs, or a privilege of those who could afford imported spices like cinnamon? The papyri are frustratingly vague, leaving you to imagine both scenarios. A humble farmer sucking on a honey pellet before talking to the village headman, or a noblewoman casually popping one before dancing at a feast. And speaking of feasts, imagine the spread. Roasted goose, figs, beer brewed thick as porridge, onions piled high, garlic chopped into sauces. Delicious? Absolutely. But breath-wise, a disaster. The banquet hall is echoing with laughter, heart music trickles in from the corner, and everyone is leaning close to whisper juicy gossip about Pharaoh's latest decree. Without mints, the room would smell like a middle school cafeteria after taco day. Here's joke number 1 for this section. You picture yourself as the lone guest who forgot their breath mint, trying desperately to breathe only through your nose all night. Not exactly graceful. Joke number 2 sneaks in with the priests. Imagine one leaning close to bless you, muttering a sacred formula, only for you to catch a whiff of yesterday's garlic stew. Suddenly, the godly experience feels a little less divine. And joke number 3, fast forward to today, where even with toothpaste and mouthwash, people still keep mints handy before dates. Egyptians just got there first. They basically invented fresh breath insurance. The air in the temple grows heavier with incense, almost sweet enough to choke on. And you realize this was half the trick. Incense masked unpleasant smells everywhere, temples, homes, and tombs alike. But incense alone wasn't enough. That's why they turned to something portable, something you could tuck into a jar or slip into your hand before a meeting with someone important. And so as you wander out of the temple and back into the night, you understand. Breath wasn't just air here. It was life. It was spirit. And it was etiquette rolled into one. Sweeten your words, sweeten your breath. That was the Egyptian way.
The path out of the temple leads you toward a quieter quarter of the city, where workshops huddled together like sleepy neighbors. You duck into one that smells unlike any other, a pungent cocktail of honey, resin, and something you can't quite place. Welcome to the Egyptian apothecary, or perhaps you might call it a kitchen of mysteries, where the earliest breath mints are being born. On the shelves are clay jars with faded markings, bundles of dried herbs tied with reed string, and bowls sticky with half-finished mixtures. You can almost hear the scrape of pestles grinding against stone, the low hum of workers chanting to keep rhythm. Tonight, you're about to meet the ingredients that made Egyptian mouths more tolerable. The mainstream historical fact is this. Surviving medical papyri describe recipes for freshening the mouth using honey mixed with fragrant spices and resins. Honey wasn't just for flavor, it was a preservative, sticky enough to bind everything together into chewable pellets. But here comes the quirky tidbit. One recipe suggests cinnamon, cardamom, and frankincense bound in honey. Sounds delicious, right? Except cinnamon and cardamom weren't local. They came from as far away as South or Southeast Asia, traveling through endless trade routes. In other words, the Egyptians' obsession with fresh breath may have sparked one of the earliest examples of long-distance grocery shopping. Now, historians still argue whether some of the more bizarre ingredients were actually used. Crocodile dung, for instance, shows up in lists of substances for cosmetics and even birth control. Some researchers wonder if it ever slipped into recipes for oral remedies, though others think that's just a scribal confusion. So, no, you're probably safe from dung-flavored Tic Tacs. Probably. Imagine the scene. A young apprentice is tasked with measuring out herbs. He sneezes dramatically as the cinnamon dust tickles his nose, and his teacher scolds him, warning not to waste such precious spice. The boy mutters something under his breath, ironically needing a mint himself. The workshop buzzes with energy. A woman carefully warms honey over a small brazier until it loosens, golden and glossy, before pouring it into a stone mortar. She sprinkles in ground cardamom, adds a lump of frankincense resin, and begins to pound with steady rhythm. The mixture grows fragrant, filling the space with a sweetness that clings to your clothes. And here's your first joke of the night. Imagine this sticky paste ending up not in someone's mouth, but in their hair by accident. Congratulations, you've just invented the world's first accidental candy-scented gel. Now, think about how exotic this all felt in ancient times. Honey wasn't rare, but pairing it with imported spices was a luxury. When you hold one of these finished pellets, you're not just holding a mouth freshener, you're holding proof of a civilization that reached across deserts and seas to satisfy even its smallest comforts. It's like if someone in your neighborhood imported rare Himalayan mint leaves just for their chewing gum. Second joke. Somewhere, surely, a thrifty Egyptian grumbled, "Why waste precious cinnamon on your mouth when we could burn it for the gods?" Priorities are always up for debate. You step back and notice the jars lining the walls, some labeled with hieratic scrawls too quick for your tired eyes to decipher. Are they recipes, shopping lists, or warnings not to mistake this mixture for face paint? Historians still argue whether the recipes in medical papyri were practical directions for daily use, or more like symbolic charms meant to combine magical properties. The ambiguity leaves you in limbo, unsure whether to swallow or spit. Another scent drifts through the doorway, garlic roasting on an open hearth nearby. You suddenly understand why breath mints were so necessary. In a cuisine dominated by onions, garlic, and fish, people weren't leaving their social impressions to chance. And joke number 3 for this section. Imagine a jealous neighbor spreading rumors, whispering, "Oh, she clearly didn't chew her frankincense ball today." The first example of mint shaming in history. As you leave the workshop, your fingers feel tacky with honey, your nose tingles with spice, and your imagination is wide awake. These odd ingredients, measured and mashed together, reveal something oddly charming. Ancient people wanted the same thing you do before a date or a meeting, that quiet confidence of not breathing last night's dinner into someone else's face. The streets outside are hushed now, torches flickering low, the smell of incense and cooking fires lingering in the air. Somewhere in those clay jars lies the first recipe for sweetness on the breath. And as you stroll away, you can't help but think, it's both strange and soothing that such small details mattered so much, even in a world of pyramids, gods, and empires.
You wander deeper into the workshop district, the sound of pestles and grinding stones echoing faintly through the night. A small doorway beckons you inside, and there you find another group at work. Not farmers or priests this time, but craftsmen who treat every ingredient like it's a sacred offering. The room is warm, filled with the dull thud of tools, and a faint shimmer of candlelight glints off jars of resin.
Here, you finally see how those peculiar Egyptian breath mints were actually made. On a broad stone slab lies a neat pile of ingredients: lumps of frankincense resin, small sticks of cinnamon, sprigs of mint-like herbs, and a jar of golden honey that catches the light like captured sunlight. A man kneels with a heavy pestle, grinding spices into fine powder. The motion is slow and deliberate, like kneading dough, and you realize that half the battle was simply patience. The mainstream fact here: Egyptian workshops relied on grinding stones and mortars to break down herbs and resins, often the same tools used for cosmetics and medicines. There wasn't a special breath mint machine, just the timeless pairing of stone and muscle. The quirky tidbit? Some records suggest that frankincense was so tough it needed to be softened with wine or warmed over coals before pounding. You imagine the craftsman sipping a little on the side. Quality control, of course. Historians still argue whether these mixtures were strictly medicinal or whether Egyptians saw them as halfway between food and cure. Some papyri call them remedies for foul breath, while others list them under ritual offerings, suggesting that chewing them may have been a way to honor the gods as well as freshen the mouth. The line between snack and spell was blurry. Watch now as the honey is poured slowly into the stone bowl. It pools thick and sticky, clinging stubbornly to the sides. Powdered cinnamon is sprinkled in, dark flecks vanishing into gold. The craftsman stirs with a wooden stick, then switches to his hands, kneading the mixture like clay. You can almost feel it stretching and tugging at his fingers. Sweet, but resistant, the way modern caramel sticks to your teeth. And here's your first joke. Picture the poor apprentice stuck with the cleanup job, scraping hardened honey off the stone slab at the end of the day. World's first dishwasher and still no tips. The air is heavy with spice. It clings to your clothes, sneaks into your lungs, and makes your stomach growl. But no one's eating these little nuggets just yet. They need to be shaped. A line of apprentices begins rolling the sticky mixture into rough spheres, some large, some small, depending on the batch. They're not uniform like your neatly pressed modern candies. Each one is unique, a bit lopsided, almost charming in its imperfection. Second joke of the night? Imagine buying a bag of these at a marketplace, only to find that half are marble-sized, while the others look like squashed pancakes. Ancient Egyptian fun size, whether you wanted it or not. As the pellets dry on clay trays, you notice how carefully they're handled. They're set in rows, not unlike an army on parade, each ball destined for a mouth, a prayer, or perhaps a noble banquet. The longer they sit, the firmer they become, honey crystallizing just enough to keep them solid. But here's a curious thought. Did people actually chew these, or were they more like lozenges to suck slowly? Historians still argue over this detail, pointing out that resins don't exactly taste delightful when bitten into. Maybe Egyptians simply let the sweetness melt gradually, a slow release of honey and spice, as they whispered their words into sacred halls. Third joke of the night? Imagine someone getting impatient, biting down hard, and suddenly realizing they've just chipped a tooth on a resin chunk. Congratulations, you now need the world's first dentist. The workshop falls quiet as the trays are set aside, the mixture ready to harden overnight. Outside, the desert air cools, carrying the smell of honey and spice into the streets. Children peer in curious, but kept at bay. The pellets aren't for them, not yet. They belong to adults with rituals to uphold and reputations to maintain. You step outside, brushing sticky dust off your hands, and the sound of the Nile drifts back into your ears. Somewhere, in a small jar tucked onto a shelf, lies a batch of fresh breath mints cooling in the night. Tomorrow, they'll be tucked into pouches, carried into temples, and popped discreetly before greetings. And as you walk away, you realize something simple yet oddly profound. No matter how grand the empire, sometimes the real magic lies in the tiny details. The rhythm of grinding stones, the sheen of honey in lamplight, and the quiet care poured into a single ball of sweetness.
The trays of sticky pellets have hardened by morning, and the workshop smells faintly of spice and smoke as the city stirs to life. You drift along the street, following the faint clatter of footsteps and voices, until you find yourself at a courtyard where people sit cross-legged, rolling tiny balls between their palms. The process seems almost meditative, like making bread rolls or prayer beads. This is the next stage, the pill-rolling sessions. Honey and spice mixtures that were ground and kneaded last night are now portioned out, pinched into clumps, and rolled smooth. Each one is laid carefully on reed mats to finish drying under the desert sun. The mainstream historical fact here is straightforward. Egyptians shaped many of their medicinal and cosmetic preparations into pills or pellets, sometimes sealing them in little packets or jars. The habit of rolling medicine into swallowable or chewable balls goes back thousands of years. It wasn't invented by modern pharmacies. And here's the quirky tidbit. Some scholars suggest that the Egyptians deliberately rolled these mints into round shapes to mirror the perfection of the sun disk. After all, roundness carried symbolic weight here. Wholeness, eternity, the cycle of Ra's daily journey across the sky. So, even a humble breath mint might echo cosmic symbolism. Still, historians argue whether these mints were more uniform in elite households or if everyday folks made them haphazardly. Would a queen's mint ball look neat and polished, while a fisherman's looked like a sticky pebble? The evidence is slim, leaving room for you to picture both ends of the spectrum. You watch as an elderly woman rolls hers with almost ceremonial grace, dipping her fingers in water to keep the honey from clinging. A boy beside her struggles, muttering as his misshapen lump sticks to his palm. The laughter that follows feels timeless, ancient people teasing each other over clumsy handiwork, just as you'd mock a lopsided cookie today. First joke. Imagine biting into one of those misshapen lumps, only to find it glued to the roof of your mouth. No escape until it dissolves. Congratulations, you've invented the world's first caramel disaster. The courtyard hums with chatter as neighbors stop by to collect a handful of pellets for the day. They tuck them into linen pouches, sometimes embroidered, sometimes plain. You notice how casually it happens, like someone today pocketing a stick of gum before heading out. There's no ceremony here, just quiet practicality. Second joke. You picture a harried father rushing out the door, realizing halfway down the street he's forgotten his mint pouch, and groaning, "Great, now everyone will know I had garlic for breakfast." The sun climbs higher, and the mats of drying pellets gleam faintly in the light. Some crack slightly, exposing gritty herbs inside, while others keep their sheen. Children eye them with curiosity, but adults shoo them away. These are not candy, they insist. Still, you can imagine a few kids sneaking a taste when no one's looking. And here's the third joke. One mischievous boy pops a pellet into his mouth, expecting sweetness, only to spit it out seconds later, sputtering at the overpowering resin flavor. Lesson learned: don't steal medicine disguised as candy. As you drift away from the courtyard, you notice the rhythm of life around you. Men haul baskets of fish from the Nile. Women trade onions and leeks at the market. Scribes carry scrolls to the temple. And somewhere in almost every pouch or pocket, a sticky little sphere waits, ready to rescue its owner from culinary regret. The act of rolling, drying, and pocketing these pellets seems simple, but to you it feels like a ritual of care, a way of preparing for the day ahead, like brushing teeth or brewing coffee. It's a moment of pause, a gesture towards social harmony, and a reminder that even empires were built one small sticky ball at a time. The courtyard fades behind you, the sound of rolling hands softening into the hum of daily life. The Nile glitters in the distance, carrying whispers of trade and travel. But for now, you hold in your palm a single honey spice pellet, round, imperfect, and oddly comforting.
The morning sun has now brightened into midday, and you find yourself wandering toward the towering walls of a temple complex. The closer you get, the more you notice that temples aren't just religious spaces. They're also laboratories, clinics, and, in a sense, pharmacies of the ancient world. If you thought your local dentist's office smelled strongly of antiseptic, wait until you step into a room filled with incense, honey, and chalky powders. Inside, priests glide about in spotless white linen, their heads shaved smooth, their bodies washed several times a day in sacred pools. They aren't just spiritual leaders, they're also healers, surgeons, and yes, the closest thing Egyptians had to dentists. It's here you see the curious overlap, a priest chanting prayers while also handing out pellets for bad breath. Imagine your modern dentist reciting hymns while polishing your teeth. The mainstream historical fact is clear. In ancient Egypt, medical practice was closely tied to temple life. Priests studied medical papyri, memorized recipes, and dispensed remedies that blended science and magic. Dentistry was part of this world, with treatments ranging from drilling abscesses to prescribing mouth rinses made of natron and herbs. But here's the quirky tidbit. One ancient papyrus suggests using ground donkey hooves mixed with honey as a dental cure. Whether that was effective or just symbolic, you can only guess, but you probably wouldn't want to test it on your molars. And now the scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether priests genuinely understood the medical benefits of their remedies, or whether these treatments were seen mainly as charms backed by divine power. Was honey chosen because it's antibacterial, or because it was considered a sacred food of the gods? Probably both. You pause to watch a priest at work. He leans over a patient who looks distinctly uncomfortable, holding his jaw with one hand and groaning softly. The priest murmurs a prayer to Thoth, patron of wisdom, while smearing a paste of herbs and honey onto a cloth. The patient bites down, grimacing, while the priest assures him this will sweeten the mouth. You're not sure whether to call it medicine or a placebo, but the act itself carries weight, both spiritual and social. Here comes joke number 1. Imagine sitting in that chair, nervously waiting, only for the priest to tell you, "Don't worry, this might sting a little for the next 3 days." The temple smells rich, incense smoldering, oils warming, a faint tang of natron from the purification baths. To you, it's a blur of sweetness and smoke, but to Egyptians, this was order made tangible. Even bad breath was a kind of disorder, and a pellet of honey and spice could bring harmony back to right. Joke number 2, you think about modern dental drills and suddenly appreciate that, for all the pain, at least your dentist doesn't insist on shaving your entire body before an appointment. The priests keep careful records on scrolls, lists of ingredients, measurements, instructions. Some are practical, others bewildering. Was crocodile dung really prescribed for breath, or did some bored scribe slip in a prank to test his apprentice's patience? Historians still argue, but you can almost imagine a young trainee being dared, "Here, chew this for the gods." Joke number 3, imagine bragging at a banquet, "Yes, I'm blessed with divine favor and donkey hoof toothpaste." Not exactly a conversation starter. But beyond the jokes, you sense the seriousness of it all. To Egyptians, healing wasn't just about curing symptoms. It was about restoring balance, ma'at, between the body, the spirit, and the cosmos. A foul-smelling mouth wasn't just unpleasant. It might indicate decay, imbalance, or even divine displeasure. The priests were guardians of harmony, whether through chants or sticky pellets. As you step out of the temple, the light blinds you for a moment, and the clamor of the city comes rushing back. Children play in the dust, women carry jars of water balanced on their heads, and somewhere in the crowd a man discreetly pops a mint pellet before speaking with a scribe. The temple's quiet gravity lingers, though, the sense that even the smallest remedies carried a sacred echo. You take a slow breath, half expecting it to smell of honey and cinnamon, and smile at the thought.
The priests might not have known about bacteria or cavities in the way modern science does, but they knew that sweetness and fragrance could ease discomfort, inspire confidence, and smooth social exchanges. And really, isn't that all most people still want from their dentists today?